Colleagues, good afternoon. This is already our appointed time and for the meeting, and we've also formed a quorum. May I call the meeting to order? Please confirm the minutes of our meeting dated the 7th of January 2013, paper CB 1581/1213. As of today, the Secretariat has not received any proposal for amendments. If members have no objection, we will confirm the minutes now. Any comments? No? Thank you very much. Since our last meeting, we have received one information paper. For details, please refer to our agenda. Do members have any comments on the information paper, please? If not, let's move on to the next item. Thank you. The next meeting is scheduled for the 26th of March, a Tuesday at 2:30. The administration has proposed that we discuss the quality of Dongxiang water and water quality monitoring by the Water Supplies Department. And for the other items, notice is pending. Do members have any comments, please? If not, then we move on to the fourth item. PWP item number 7414RO, improvement works at Mui Wo. Please invite the administration to join us. Thank you.
歡迎出席會議嘅政府代表。現在我請政府代表介紹文件。當局係會以電腦投影片作介紹嘅，請盡量精簡。
多謝主席。各位委員。
We're going to do a PowerPoint presentation for us. Thank you. We propose to upgrade paper or item 414RO improvement works at Mui Wo. We'd like to upgrade part of it to Cat A for the construction of a segregated pedestrian walkway and cycle track, a footbridge, civic square, and ancillary improvement works at Mui Wo. I give the floor to Mr. David Low, Chief Engineer. Thank you. In 2004, the outcome of the public consultation on concept plan for Lantau was such that there was widespread support for the improvement works in Mui Wo. And then in 2006, the land use concept plan was drafted, and then improvement works to Mui Wo have been incorporated into this plan. The residents there continued to show their support for this project. In 2007, the revised Lantau concept plan was issued, and the need for the works were further confirmed to rejuvenate the local community, boost the local economy, and in particular enhance the road safety for motorists and other users. In 2007, the CNED conducted the feasibility study and detailed design of the works for Mui Wo. In between 2007 and 2010, 3 public forums were held to collect public views, to revise our plans, and to confirm the detailed design. And the works will be constructed in phases. We now seek member support for Stage 1 of the works. Mui Wo used to be a small town for agriculture, farming, and also husbandry. However, Mui Wo is no longer the main landing place for going to Mui Wo. We'd like to rejuvenate the whole area so as to promote local tourism and to improve the quality of life for the residents. This is Mui Wo Pier for ferries to the other parts of Hong Kong, and it links up to walking trail to Discovery Bay to Nam Shan walking trail, so on and so forth. The purpose of Phase 1 is to improve or to link up the transport hub in Mui Wo with other parts of Lantau and to rejuvenate the old market and also the civic square. Phase 1 works involves a segregated pedestrian walkway and a cycle track so as to improve transport safety, traffic safety, and to enhance the link between Mui Wo and the old market. We will also build a civic square here to improve the city landscape, to provide amenities, facilities, improve the environment for the residents, and enhance the attractiveness of Mui Wo to other tourists. We will provide 8 amenity areas in villages at Mui Wo for enjoyment by villagers as well as visitors. First, the segregated pedestrian walkway and cycle track. The red square is the scope of the pedestrian walkway, starting from River Silver to the Cook Food Center in Mui Wo town. The segregated walkway and cycle track is the major access from different parts of Mui Wo, of Lantau to Mui Wo. There are 2,000 bicycle trips in and out of Mui Wo. They have to go past An Kong Wan Road to access the pier. At present, there is no segregated walkway or carriageway or cycle track, and they share a 7.3 meter wide road, and the existing footpath is rather narrow. There is an amenity area in the middle. There is no cycle track now. We are going to build a new pedestrian walkway and cycle track using board drills. We will have a cantilever platform built here. The cycle track will be built on the existing footpath. This is how it looks now. The walkway is 3.5 meter wide, and this is the river bank. After construction of the pedestrian walkway, the walkway would be above the river bank with a width of 5 meters, and the cycle track will be built on the existing walkway. There will be a wave-shaped amenity area to segregate the two, and there will be benches for people to enjoy. River Silver has a bridge where cyclists and pedestrians use together. In future, the two will be segregated. And we're also going to build a civic square, just between River Silver and Silver Mine Bay Hotel. There is a planting area here, and also an elderly home, and also a works area. There will be a major corridor bringing pedestrians from Silver Mine Bay to the older area. There will also be a public performing area. The major corridor is rather wide, so that visitors can walk from the waterfront to the old Mui Wo town. There will be playground facilities and physical fitness facilities for kids and the elderly. For the public performing area, there will be a stage for large-scale events, festive activities, and street-level performances. We have added elements in our design to reflect the local features of Mui Wo. For instance, in the Civic Square, we will have a fish-shaped display to reflect the fishing background of Mui Wo. We're going to have a replica of the sword stone at Pafong village, and also we will use plum blossom inscribed with classical poems. And other than the pedestrian walkway in the Civic Square, we'll also build 8 amenities areas in different villages to improve the environment there and to offer open space for visitors and residents. There will be pavilions, benches, and also rails for racks for parking bicycles. 322 trees will be affected, 230 of them will be preserved, and 92 will be removed, 38 will be felled, and 54 transplanted. None of the trees to be felled or transplanted involve rare species. With members' support, we're going to apply for approval of funding in March from PWSC and then to FC in May. Tenders will be called in May, and construction will start in August. We hope to complete the works in 2 years. Thank you. According to Rule 83A of our Rules of Procedure, members cannot move any motion and or amendments in relation to matters where they have a direct and indirect pecuniary interest, or to speak on such matters. A member may not speak on such matters unless relevant interest is disclosed. So may I remind members that if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest in this item, please declare the nature of such interest before you speak. And I open the floor to members. I suggest that each member should have 4 minutes, including replies from the administration, because we have a heavy agenda this afternoon. So 3 members have registered their intention to speak: Dr. Kwok Kai-ki, Ms. Ann Chiang, and Mr. Wu Chi-wai, and Mr. Chen Han-pen. Dr. Kwok Kai-ki. Thank you, Chairman. I believe we will support this project. However, it has been 9 years since it was first proposed in 2004, and a number of revisions have been made. I have 2 questions to ask. First, the administration mentioned recently that there is a proposal to provide HOS on Lantau in Mui Wo, home ownership scheme flats. That means there will be the population will be higher in Mui Wo. As a result, greater demand for community facilities. I'd like to know what in the concept plan, or rather in the presentation, we know that there will be existing facilities. I'd like to know whether there will the future population growth has been factored into the design. And then the cycle track is rather short, just from River Silver to the Cooked Food Center. It is too short to encourage cyclists. So is it possible to extend the cycle track a little bit further towards Silver Mine Bay so that both residents and visitors can use it? And near the ferry pier, I don't see any major improvements. Now, I'm talking about the pier, not the civic square. Now, it is a major transport interchange. There's a bus terminus there, as well as taxi stands and lorry stands. Can the area be improved so that there will be more space for pedestrians, and can the PTI be moved a little bit inland so that there will be more space and facilities to receive visitors? After the pedestrian walkway and civic square are completed, the ferry pier or the area nearby is really not compatible with the new development. Administration. Dr. Kwok said that there might be a population growth as a result of new HOS. The works have not factored that into our design. I will consider Dr. Kwok's proposal and see whether we will have more facilities to be provided there. The 2 points mentioned by Dr. Kwok have been included in our project, though not in phase 1, but phase 2. From in between River Silver and also the Cook Food Center, there is frequent conflict between motorists and pedestrians. We want to extend the cycle track, but there's a problem of land resumption because the villages are now quite close to the accesses, but we will certainly do that in phase 2. Regarding the area at the pier, we are going to expand the square in front of the ferry pier, and then the car park next to it will be turned to a waterfront promenade. However, the facilities will have to be re-provisioned first, and we are discussing with the local community, and the works will be taken care of in phase 2.
Now, what about the time span for stage 2? It's been a long time. The construction starting time and the completion time. Now we are actively talking to the rural committees and the local bodies, and on relocation we have a sound plan in respect of stage 2. Ms. Chang, thank you, Chairman. Now I would like to ask. Now I see that in Annex 2 in the document you said that the cycle width will be 3.5 meters wide, but Hong Kong's planning standards and guidelines say that the cycle width, path width, two-way should be 4 meters, and 3.5 meters is the minimum width. So why do we adopt the minimum width and not a more satisfactory width? Because it seems that you do have some space. Can we have 4 meters instead? Now we see that 3.5 meter wide cycle path is a little too cramped for 2 bicycles. Thank you. Now, Ms. Chang's information is correct. 3.5 meters is the lower limit for the current standards, and as explained in the introduction, now how can we find the space for the cycle path? We use a cantilevered bridge because we do not want to do it on reclaimed land, because the cantilevered path would be more demanding the wider it is on the structure. So we've talked to the Transport Department, and 3.5 meters is acceptable. So after taking into consideration all factors, we ended up with 3.5 meters. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to make 2 points in connection with stage 2. Dr. Kwok already asked some questions I wanted to ask, but 2 points. Now, the Mui Wo Ferry Pier in future long-term development will play an important role in external links. Now, in stage 2 of your plan, would there be more development of the superstructure for the ferry pier so as to serve this important tourist location, so that the superstructure development can subsidize the ferry operations, and also about the extension of the cycle path. Now, in the past, I sometimes went there, and I went to Tong Folk. So it seems that right now this travels to the village, and so it's different from the routes usually taken by people who come to Mui Wo to ride on bicycles. I'd like to know how you plan to deal with this in stage 2, and also would there be a longer-term planning consideration? For instance, longer-term, Lantau is a tourist destination, is within Country Park, and there should be a long-term cycle track network for the whole of Lantau. Now, on today's development plan that we are going to discuss today, now the cycle path serves 2 purposes. First, Mui Wo residents rely on bicycles. This is the current situation, and it will be so in the future. Now, and if we look at this plan, in this slide, now whether it's from Mui Wo Ferry Pier or from the Mui Wo Old Town Center, you can link up to attractive tourist attractions such as Discovery Bay and country tracks and so on. So for villagers who rely on bicycles, the cycle path serves their needs. As for Mr. Wu's point, he may be talking about something different, the cycle path network for Lantau, and that is not part of the Mui Wo development. Now, however, we will take on board his point and consider how we are going to develop the network for Lantau as a whole. As for the superstructure of the ferry pier, now at the Mui Wo Pier, we do not have such a plan right now. But Mr. Wu probably knows in Central, the outlying ferry piers at Central, we do plan to add more floors so that they can be used for commercial purposes as a means to stabilize the ferry derived income. Now, as for the Mui Wo development, we do not have any plan for the ferry pier's superstructure right now. Mr. Chehan-Pan. Thank you, Chairman. Now, regarding the proposal for Mui Wo, we welcome this. Now, actually, in the development of Mui Wo, many outlying islands, district councillors and rural committee members wish there would be more development, and we've been discussing this proposal for a long time, and we've conducted consultation locally with broad support. So I support this project. However, we wish that Mui Wo can be developed into a small, attractive town. And the project this time is rather on a small scale, and I hope the government would inject more resources in the future to help develop the outlying islands. Now, Mui Wo used to be patronized by quite a lot of people, and with the development of more roads and with rising ferry fares, there are less people going there. So bicycles are very useful in the southern Lantau area, so we hope there can be more cycle tracks being developed, and also for residences or accommodation for visitors. Right now we only have hotels, and so we like there to be room and board sort of arrangements so that the people can go there and I think this and also on the cycle parking problem. Now, this is a problem faced by outlying islands as a whole. I think there will be cycle parking spaces, but will they be enough, and will there be plans for expansion? Chairman, now on hostels or room and board type accommodation, now there are quite a lot of resort accommodation for rental, so they are available. Now, Mr. Chan's point is that in stage 1 there isn't quite enough, but as Mr. Chan said, we have been talking to the local residents. They wanted it to be operational as early as possible, and we have selected ideas that do not involve land resumption or relocation. So we do these first, and so we are responding to the residents' wishes. And for stage 2, more discussion is required. And so we are now doing the priority items first, and we want to solve the congestion or competition for road space between pedestrians and vehicles. Now, there is now a cycle track that goes past a town park into the villages, and we hope by this means we can stimulate the economic activities within the old town area. Now, as for the cycle track or cycle path, we will give that further consideration. Now, expanding from Mui Wo and the network for Lantau, we will give those our thoughts. Now, we will, it depends on future development, parking spaces, the demand, we will examine that. Mr. James Tan. Now, I'm not very familiar with Mui Wo. Now, we try to develop local economies. Now, are we talking about Hong Kong people going there for weekends, or are we trying to cater to tourists? Now, this way to attract tourists. Now, you know, this is a very sensitive issue right now. Do local residents welcome visitors from outside Hong Kong? Maybe they will make the place not so clean. Thank you, Chairman. Now, I think we do not specifically target certain type of visitor or types of visitors. Now, we try to provide better support facilities so that people arrive by ferry and then they can enjoy a better environment for walking into the villages. They go through the Time Park and end up at certain attractive destinations. Now, many foreign tourists like to walk, for instance, to the Patmong village. So we have a sculpture, a rock sculpture there. So there is information, signage taking the tourists there. Now, as Mr. Tian said, we will liaise with the Tourism Development Board, and perhaps they can give us a mention in their literature and publicity materials. Now, with more pedestrian flow, I think there would be more commercial activity, catering establishments, and so on. So we try to provide better support facilities so that both residents and tourists would benefit. That's not what I mean. It's not that the Tourism Development Board wants this to happen. Now, now the local people want their local economies to be developed, the suitable amount of traffic. So if you want us to do something to help, we would be glad to help. Now, but I do not want you, I'm not asking for more facilities to be developed to cater to tourists. Now, your target is not the foreign tourists. Perhaps you can look at the 2007 concept plan for the development of Lantau. And so northern Lantau is scheduled for development. As for the other areas, they would be reserved for conservation in keeping with the sustainable development principles. Now, Mr. Tian suggests whether the government can do more promotion for southern Lantau tourism to attract more tourists. Now, we will talk to the relevant government bureau. If there are no further questions, we shall conclude the discussion of these items. Do you support the above proposal by the administration for funding? If there are, so we will endorse this project for the Public Works Subcommittee. Next item, item number 5. Policy relating to a recent case of sale of hotel rooms by a developer.
好負責任啊！我哋歡迎出席會。
We welcome the administration officials. Please take us through the document. The secretary. You have your seats. Secretary, thank you, Chairman, members. Now, on 18th of February, a developer announced the development of regarding rooms of hotel in Kwai Chung, the Apex Horizon. Now, members of the public are concerned whether it's in keeping with existing legislation and other requirements. This involves different policy bureaus and departments. After learning about the announcement, the Development Bureau quickly collected the information about matters for concern, and on the 19th I pointed out to the media that the lease was before the July 2003, so there was no prohibition for separate sale of rooms, but the purchasers must note that these rooms must continue to be used for hotel use. Otherwise, this would be against the conditions of the land grant. The Lands Department will exercise enforcement, including a repossession of the property. Now, we issued a press release reminding the public that they must be cautious in buying such properties and take note of the requirements under land planning, hotel licensing, etc. We want to remind members of the public that when they purchase these properties, they have to be very careful. They must understand what they are buying and what use restrictions there are. This separate sale of rooms is novel in Hong Kong, and the relevant document is very complex in terms of legal considerations, so the public must be careful. The CE and the policy secretaries have reminded the public that the project is a hotel project and not residential, and they call upon residents to take careful note of the requirements and know their duties and rights. Now, given the panel's requirement, along with the departments and bureaus involved, we briefly inform you about the regulatory framework and the current follow-up work by the authorities. Now, on development, there's town planning ordinance, building ordinance, and also land grant stipulations. And there's also the hotel Guest House and Hotels Ordinance requirements. I will ask my colleagues to brief you about all the relevant stipulations. So there are several main points. According to all the leases issued before July 2003 do not have restrictions on separate sales of rooms.
So when the government, including government sales of land, as well as these projects will have restrictions. If it's a hotel, can only sell comprehensively and not separately. Second, if the lease does not restrict selling separately, when the developer sells these property, they still have to follow the deed of DMC provisions and seek approval from the departments. In determining the DMC and selling it separately is really not a violation. The problem is whether it clearly states what they're selling, and so purchasers will be clear. And after the sales, was whether or not the land and the buildings can still fulfill the conditions in the land lease. For example, the user restriction, as well as the GFA requirements in terms of the user, as well as other conditions. The third, in terms of Apex Horizon, the land lease was approved before 2002 July, so they can sell separately, but they must still approve permission in terms of the DMC. And so in determining the DMC, and selling it separately is not a violation of itself, but the land lease has the covenant condition that the GFA of the hotel usage must not be less than 21,190 square meters, and if after the sales this is not met, then that would be a violation of the lease. Excuse me. And the lands department can use the relevant enforcement action, including but not restricted to re-entering. Fourth, the hotel needs to be in accordance with the fire safety and building users requirements as accordance to the HAGAO to get a hotel license. And during the time of operation, the hotel must also be in accordance with the ordinance and other laws. If the administration feels that there are violations, then it can take enforcement actions. If the property is no longer being used for hotel, then perhaps it may violate the land lease condition and may also violate other violations of the buildings department, and so they can take enforcement action. Now, I would like to ask the various departments, such as the RLD, buildings department, etc., to introduce the regulatory framework and to talk about the work they have done in terms of this particular project. And we're happy to answer all the questions. Yes, thank you. How about let us ask questions first? Because it seems that, and then you can just respond. Chairman, I agree with what she says. The problem is, right now, they're saying a lot of very obvious points, Chairman. You say all these very obvious points. It's really not necessary. We really want to ask questions, and then they should just answer our questions. Yes, the law is very clear. Like, of course, we must follow this, and we don't have to discuss it just right now with just such a short amount of time. So you're saying that, to clarify, the questions. So I mean, maybe if we let them introduce first, then the questions from members will be more brief. Honestly, we have very little time now, and there are several items now. So if you let them speak now, Chairman, you give us enough time to ask questions. So not in the middle. It's saying that, oh, if it's not urgent, then I hope that the governments will postpone the other items, because this is very important. The time that you allocated initially is very short. Now, if the Secretary has just talked very briefly, and now if all the other departments talk, then we'll have very little time left. And if you're saying that we have to talk about other items later, then we won't have enough time. So I think that since we don't have enough time, either you take away some of the leftover items. I mean, some of them we don't talk about today, but I allocated an hour and a half. But there are 11 people who've raised their hands. So, Chairman, this is my suggestion, because the Secretary has already said several departments want to speak up, and I think we should give it an opportunity. So why don't we restrict their time? Each department has 2 minutes, so they can be brief. And then, for example, some things we don't know, and then they want to speak briefly. So, yes, okay, then perhaps, so why don't we let them speak for 2 minutes briefly? So maybe the members' questions won't ask as much. Thank you, Chairman. We'll be as brief as possible. Thank you. So we hope that before we answer, we have 4 questions, then that you will know some of the facts first. Perhaps I'll ask the Lands Department first, Madam Lin. Hello, Chairman. In terms of enforcement of leases, the most important thing is looking at the provisions of the lease, and we respect the spirit of the contract. So if the particular lease does not prevent the selling individually, we cannot prevent this. And then also they do not have to apply for approval from the Lands Department. So right now, what we have to do is 2 things. First, in accordance to, we heard some commentary during the first day of sales as to whether or not whether the buyer can live in the hotel or not. And then, in fact, some people say that they want to let their family live in there. So the administration is very concerned about this. But because in terms of enforcement, a hotel's user, or perhaps if we're saying that there must be a minimum GFA that is used for hotel, that cannot be equivalent to the user of a private residential area. So what we must do right now first is in terms of this developer, when they are launching the sale of this particular property, what is their intention? What is their plan? Is it still, do they still consider it as a hotel? That's the first point. Second, in the future, once they have sold the property, each of the individual owners, how will they use the particular unit that they purchase? That is that particular hotel room. Of course, this stage of work will have to be followed and monitored by us periodically. Same as the way we enforce other property. We'll have to just so perhaps I'll stop here and then I'll give it to other department. Yes, thank you, Director. It's not coming through to the microphone. It's not coming through. It's not coming through to the microphone. In terms under the buildings ordinance, this 23A, it stated that for developments of hotels, it can be counted as a non-residential user, and so they can use there's some usage of the site coverage, and then so some of the facilities that are necessary for hotels that can also not be counted in the GFA. So under this Section 23A, they can have an easing in terms in the operation if they want to change it to something other than hotel. And according to Section 23A, then they were already violated Section 23A. Then the Buildings Department can take enforcement actions, such as issuing an order to prevent this particular violation of usage. And it's very clearly stated that if this hotel development, if they never have a license for operating a hotel, or if this hotel operating license is not renewed, then we can consider that the usage has been changed. And that's all I have to say. Okay. Next, Mr. Kwok Fan of the Home Affairs Department. So right now, the license comes from 1988. There was a big fire into the hotel, so there was a death and injury. So to protect citizens, we have a licensing systems to ensure that hotels have meet the standard in terms of fire and other ordinance. Now, according to law, the hotels means that whoever's living in there means that any premises whose occupier, proprietor, or tenant holds out that to the extent of his available accommodation, he will provide sleeping accommodation for any person presenting himself where appears able. Now, however, if the minimum period of 28 continuous days, and if it's exceeding that, then it will not be under regulation by this particular ordinance, because it's not a target of this particular ordinance. So under the licensing system, all of the developments have to be in accordance with the law, such as fire safety ordinance and buildings department regulations. And if they are in violation of the HAGAO and other ordinance, then they may be subject to a fine and may have to go to jail. And they also, perhaps, we can also revoke or temporarily revoke the hotel operating license or to refuse to renew this particular license. Perhaps that's all I have now. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Wong-fat of the Deputy Commissioner of Inland Revenue Operations. Now, if someone is operating a hotel in Hong Kong, then they will need a profits tax. If they are selling it and then have a profit, then it depends on what kind of room is this. Is it a capital type of assets? And if it is a capital, then it do not have to pay the tax. But how do we determine this? It really depends on all of the relevant circumstances. So there may be a tax issue is the stamp duty. So under the current stamp duty ordinance, we have to determine whether it's residential or not. And currently, a residential property, they have to sign a sales and purchase agreement, and then they will have to pay a stamp duty. If it's non-residential, then when they actually have a deed, then they will have to get it. But last Friday, there was a suggestion to amend this that even non-residential property will also have to pay a stamp duty when they sign a sales and purchase agreement. And different types of stamp duty would be a special stamp duty, as well as a buyer's stamp duty. The SSD was implemented in 2011. But in October of 2012, there was an amendment to increase it from 24 months to 36 months. And last year, the Finance Secretary also introduced a buyer stamp duty. So if the buyer is a non-permanent resident in Hong Kong, then they have to buy this. They have to be subject to this buyer stamp duty. So the SSD and the buyer stamp duty is only used for residential property and not for non-residential property. That's all I have to say. Next, who's next? Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask the Estates Agent Authority, the Director of Operations of the Estate Agents Authority, Mr. Anthony Wong. So thank you. So we've noticed last week that there is a selling of hotels, of individual rooms, and this is through estate agents. And at the beginning of last week, through the media, we have issued emails to all for almost 30,000 estate agents, as well as senior officials in those companies. And we went there to the site and then talked about the sales sites. The importance is that to let the agents know of the complexity of this particular project, and to say that they must not mislead buyers, to let them know that there's a risk involved in this complex project, and ask them if their buyer has there's any questions, they should seek legal advice. As so far, we have not received any complaints for this particular project. Still, we are closely monitoring the circumstances. If there's a need, we will issue guidelines, and we'll continue to look into this. As we know that there are perhaps some buyers who want to sell immediately, so we have the same standards for our estate agents on this part. And if we do have any complaints, we'll start investigations. Chairman, so what we have reported is the information that we have currently, or what we are doing now, or will do in the future. Now, as you know, their issues are rather complex, and we have to do complicated analysis, or perhaps even get legal advice. So, after answering the questions from members, so we'll try to answer as much as we can. If we cannot comprehensively answer the questions, then we are happy, in accordance to the progress of this, to come back and to report it to you. Thank you. Thank you. So perhaps I can see the list here. So right now, the members want to ask questions. Like Mr. Kwok K, Mr. Regina, if Mr. Chen Haken, Mr. Michael Tian, Mr. Chen Gamin, Ms. Claudia Mo, Mr. Alan Leung, Ms. Anne Chung, Mr. James Tian, Mr. Hu Chi Wai, Mr. Tony Tian, Dr. Kenneth Ng, Ms. Sid Ho, Madam Anne Mack, Mr. Fernando Zheng, Mr. Fernando Zheng, Mr. Abraham Sheck, Mr. Paul Tia, Mr. Chang Han Pan. 10. So, is the order can we follow the order of people who submitted letters? Because we submitted letters. Yeah. Those who are submitted letters, can we speak first? Yes, some members have given us letters. Yes, I know some panels follow that way, but we've always used a method of like whoever puts a hand first. So I don't think we should change our orders. So maybe you can just hold on for a bit. Don't worry, there'll be time for you to speak. Right now there are 21 members who want to ask questions. So how about 4 minutes each? So that would be 84 minutes in total. 84 minutes. As I've said, I've allocated an hour and a half for this item. So that would be 90 minutes. If there's really a need, or if everyone is really punctual, then there should be enough time. If we do not have enough time, then Secretary has agreed, then we can have a special meeting. And the Secretary will come back and to discuss this. I think that is a liberal attitude. So 4 minutes each. So as we calculated now, should be enough. So I do hope that you can be brief. And of course, the 4 minutes will also include the official's response. So it could be, because then, in fact, we may have a few minutes left. The question is that some questions are not very clear. So you can have an opportunity to ask clearly. So now it's time for members' questions. First is Mr. Kwakaki.
Thank you, President Chairman. 11 government officials are here. I thought that there would be something important to be announced, but it seems that the government is rather helpless. Last year, the FS, the CSWA, and even the CE said that they were very concerned about the matter, and we thought that the government could help the public or buyers to resolve their problems. Now, before 2003, all developers were entitled to do that, and some developers, together with property or real estate agents, may use misleading advertisements to attract buyers to buy these units, and some have reported to the police. There is nothing for the administration to tell us now. They're entirely within their lease, and if it is over 28 days, it's also in line with your license. And according to the Inland Revenue, if they can call it capital gain or capital asset, then they don't have to pay any profits tax. So this government is really useless. I think Chung Kong Holdings have slapped you on your face. People are not expected to pay stamp duty. So Chung Kong is telling you that all these are useless. And for people who are waiting to become flat owners and buyers who have been misled into buying the flats thinking that they can be occupants, well, they are in great hardship. Well, for developments approved as hotels before 2003, well, they would follow suit. They would follow the footstep of this case. How many units and a GFA will gradually be sold in this manner? Secondly, there are suspected misleading advertisements, but it's useless to say anything now because over 300 flats have been sold, and the secretary could only use empty words he has cautioned prospective buyers to be careful, to be cautious, and that he might investigate the real estate agents and might prosecute Chanko Holdings. How can the Secretary do that? Because Chanko lawyers have already found and abused all the loopholes available in the legislation. So how many more units are to come? How many more prospective buyers will be lured into buying such units? And how can we ensure that tourists to Hong Kong have enough hotel rooms? Well, in 2003, I'd like to know the number of units involved and approved before 2003. And how can the government ensure that there won't be hundreds of thousands of similar flats sold to very enthusiastic buyers? Secretary, first, the number of rooms and GFA that could be sold without violating the terms in the lease. Well, the Lands Department is checking our records. As we all know, we have over 200 hotels in Hong Kong, or even more, and it takes time for the Lands Department to check the leases. So I apologize, I won't be able to provide such information now, but the Lands Department colleagues are now checking the records as demanded by us, and we do have a duty to come out, and because we have the duty to remind members of the public that they have to understand the status of the units before making a decision to buy them. Speaker is off mic. Speaker is off mic. Well, 3.5 minutes were used in asking questions, and only half a minute was left for the Secretary to reply. So I really want to have a longer reply from the Secretary. Well, you can give him 4 minutes to answer. You just don't ask any question. But 4 minutes are already passed. Please do not digress. Allow me to chair the meeting. Mrs. Regina Ip. Chairman. I thank Mr. Chen, the Secretary, for explaining the policy to us with a team of government officials. I don't know. I don't have a good knowledge of laws in this area. Now, people in Hong Kong want to be homeowners. For those that have purchased these rooms, I'd like to know whether they enjoy the same rights as if they were ordinary flat owners. For instance, can they resell their units to another buyer without paying stamp duty? Can they sublet the flat to another tenant? So will the interest or the rights will be just the same as a buyer of a small residential unit? And what about the total number of units sold? I'm most concerned about the interests and rights of these people. According to our understanding, 360 rooms have been sold from the Apex Horizon. That's our understanding. Secondly, these are hotel rooms, not residential flats. So they cannot be used as a residential unit. Mrs. Ip asked whether the unit can be resold. Well, there is no restriction in the lease regarding reselling. As regards the tax aspect, perhaps I invite Mr. Wong-fat, Deputy Commissioner of Inland Revenue, to answer. Thank you. If someone has purchased a hotel room from the hotel owner and resell it, well, will he has any tax liability? It depends on the nature of the capital. Or is it a capital asset? And a number of factors are at play. And if he is just a conformer and he resells it very quickly, then this is an indicator for us to say that he is trying to speculate and to make a profit in a very short period of time, and he will be required to pay profits tax. All right, but what about stamp duty? It depends on whether it is a residential unit or a non-residential property. So how do you regard hotel rooms? Well, we have to enforce the stamp duty ordinance. The stamp duty ordinance provides that to decide whether a property is classified into residential or residential property, they have to look into a number of documents, including the government lease, the DMC, the occupation permit. If there is anything in this document to say that the property can be partly used as a residential unit, then it is a non-residential unit. But you have not answered my question. We have to check the documents for all the units. Well, let's take Apex Horizon as an example. Take Apex Horizon as an example. We've checked the OP. It is not a residential property, and therefore on resale, under the current legislation, no stamp duty is payable. However, the ad valorem stamp duty is applicable. And can it be sold to a non-permanent resident of Hong Kong? No. SSD is not applicable, but stamp duty is applicable. No need to pay buyer's stamp duty. So if the length of residence is over 28 days and it is not regarded as a hotel, I'd like to know how is this provision applied? Thank you. Let me explain. Under the Hotel and Guest House Ordinance, HHAO, a guest house or hotel means any premises whose occupier, proprietor, or tenant holds out that he will provide sleeping accommodation for any person. But under Cap 349C, if the letting period is a continuous period of 28 days, then the premises is not subject to the regulation of Cap 349A. So, in other words, such premises do not need a license, hotel license from the authority. Any supplement? Chairman. I think there is some part of the question in relation to tax not answered for the sake of completeness. Now, Apex Horizon, or units of Apex Horizon was sold last week. The BSD and SSD do not apply. And Mrs. Yip asked about reselling of the units. Perhaps Mr. Wong can explain to us now if a room is resold to Mr. A, and what tax liability Mr. A has. Because just last week, the FS announced some new measures. I think I'd like to elaborate on that point. Mr. Wong, last Friday, the FS announced that the timing for paying the ad valorem stamp duty of non-residential property to the point of the signing of PSA, purchase and sale agreement. Now, if that sublet is passed, then for these transactions, ad valorem stamp duty applies. Mr. Gary Chen. A developer is expected of asking members of the public to buy hotel rooms in a misleading manner. This is disappointing and regrettable. And I think the government cannot shirk its responsibility. Because if we look at the layout plan for a sale of the hotel rooms, we can see that the design of this hotel is very different from ordinary hotels. For instance, there is a pantry, there's a kitchen for cooking, and every unit has 2 bedrooms. So the layout plan is very different from ordinary hotel rooms. When the plans were approved, did the government notice that now this hotel site has been developed into something like a residential development. Why were the plans approved? Was it because the relevant departments did not do a good job in gatekeeping, or it just turned a blind eye to that? Or was it helpless to say no? And according to the administration, under the lease, the hotel rooms could be sold separately. And the secretary told us that it's difficult to check all the relevant documents. My colleague has found out that under the same developer, there are still 4,500 similar unit flats. 1,600 odd in some other service apartment developments. There are 4,500 rooms in total, and they can be sold in this way. So can the secretary assure us that we can prevent such things from happening again? And the license will expire in 2018, and according to the administration, if the licensing conditions are not satisfied, then the license will not be renewed. That being the case, what will be the impact on buyers of the hotel rooms? So why were the plans approved? Can I ask Mr. Au, the Director of Buildings, to explain? Thank you. In vetting the building plans, we have to consider the design standards, building standards. Now, if it is a hotel, we have to check whether it is a hotel. Under Section 23A, it has to apply for concessions. We only have to check whether it is a hotel when it's applying for concessions, hotel concessions, under Section 23A. And we have a code of practice issued to set out the criteria we use to assess whether a development is a hotel development, and this will include whether the site is suitable for hotel development and whether the basic facilities required for hotel use are provided, and whether a central air conditioning system and a centralized hot water supply system are provided, and whether the building will be operated as a licensed hotel under the HAGAO. Now, if these conditions are satisfied, then we will accept that it is a hotel and provide hotel concessions under Section 23, regular 23A. Please be succinct. Yes, I will be as quick as possible. Mr. Gary Chen asked for, just gave us a list, and I think his request was just the same as what was sought by Dr. Kwokaki, and that is similar hotel developments approved before 2003. After the Land Department has checked the documents, a list will be provided for members. And is it true that the government is helpless or hands tied when faced with this situation? Well, time's up. Shall I go on, or should I pause here or ask the Director of Lands to elaborate? Thank you. Some members or a member felt that the government was entirely helpless when faced with this scenario. Well, I beg to differ. Now, we cannot assume that users will certainly breach the regulations in using the hotel rooms. We must not have this assumption first. Secondly, when we want to enforce the lease, is it true that there is nothing we can do? No, under the lease, well, it's just like many other terms under the common law. We don't have a definite definition for hotel, but that alone would give us more flexibility. We will use common understanding and also case law accumulated in other common law jurisdictions. no matter what, one thing for sure is, if you look at cases in other common law jurisdictions, a hotel is certainly different from a private residential development. Now, if a buyer has purchased a hotel room and he thinks that it can be used as an ordinary residential unit, if he thinks that he can either live here or allow his family members to live there and to decorate the room as he likes or renovate as like, this is not possible and will certainly enforce the lease conditions. If some people think that they can use various tactics to hide the fact that the room is being used as a private residence, well, of course there can be various tactics, but as I said, in interpreting the definition, interpreting the term hotel, we are very flexible. We are not bound by the length of stay by an occupant in the room. For instance, if a person tells us that he would only live there for 11 months, and then he goes out of town for 1 month and let the room to another person, and trying to conceal the fact that it is a residential unit for himself, and do it again the next year, well, it all depends on the facts of each case and also suspicious points, and we are not really bound by the lease or the license. Then if a developer or a buyer would like to be smart, well, we will not turn a blind eye to the situation, while I don't rule that some cases may eventually go to the court.
Mr. Chairman, now, just now there was a question about the license in. Now it's first Mr. Michael Tian, and then Mr. Chang. Now I didn't hear quite clearly. How about what hotels and what flats? I'm saying, suppose you are the buyer. Now I'll ask you what use is qualified as a hotel, and you say many factors are taken into consideration, and hotels and residential flats have certain features. We're not arguing about those. We are talking about occupation by oneself. Now, the DMC says that it can be separately sold, and the individual owners can receive rent. But I don't see the distinction between the hotel and residential unit. Usually hotels are let out to a person who is unrelated to me, and it's an investment. Now, on whether the usage is as a hotel, now if it's used for self-occupation, then it's counted as a residential unit. Is that it? Now, if he buys the unit, it's held by a trustee, and then it's leased to oneself. And what about that case? Or if he's sold to a certain person and he lets his children occupy it, then is that also a residential unit? Do you have a definition? Now, is self-occupation definitely in contravention of the hotel requirement? For instance, Regal, the hotel owner, he leaves a penthouse for his own occupation. It's a frequent occurrence in other countries too. So the owner lives there throughout the year. So is that not a hotel? And then you say that if it's not used as hotel, you can recover the land. Now, if some units are in controversial, how can you recover the whole piece of land? And also, 100 years later, if you do not renew the hotel license, how about the person who bought the unit today? Now, there are many questions raised. Now, firstly, if it's self-occupied, then definitely it's not a hotel room. And secondly, as I mentioned earlier, if it's not for self-occupation, but you use other guises to disguise the residential use, for instance, as Mr. Tian said, it might be rented to oneself in a roundabout way. Well, maybe it's for one's children. In that case, it's also not a hotel unit. My children pays rent to pay rent to me, then it's still not a hotel unit. Or how about relatives? Now, even in common law jurisdictions, leases do not define what's a hotel, but there is a common point that is for a hotel, it's not the usual tenancy. In English, it's a license. So if hotel rooms are let under a license, then the occupant or the person who makes use of that hotel does not have the sole right of use of that hotel room. If you stipulate that the room is always for your children and not for rental by any person on the street, then that already does not qualify as a hotel use. For instance, a rich person reserves a hotel room for his use all the time. In that case, would he still get the hotel license? I will defer to my colleagues. But for this case, the lease in this case is not whether the land is used for hotel, but we require a minimum hotel use GFA. So if there's a room used for residence, then already it doesn't meet the stipulation of minimum GFA in the lease. Now, it's to be decided by the court on what's self-occupation. Now, we will use our interpretation. Now, in some cases, we are asked to give a clear definition on what's a hotel and what's a residence. Well, certainly, you have to do that. Now, from the point of lease, the absence of a definition doesn't mean that it's unclear now or indeterminate. Now, we've all the experience of living in a hotel or in our own homes, we know which is which. How about 100 years later? Now, we have to keep to the time allotment. If we can't cover everything, we can have a special meeting. I cannot drag it on, or I may be reproached. We cannot talk about what will happen in 100 years. 2018, is it still lands? Yes. Now, after 2018, if there is no hotel license, I mentioned earlier that the use of this property, whether it's used as a hotel, that doesn't depend on whether there's a hotel license. Of course, if there is no hotel license, then it's a very clear factor that we have to take into account. Now, even if the hotel license is renewed, if certain rooms are not considered by us to be for hotel use but for self-occupation as residence, then it will definitely be against the lease. Chairman, now by 2018, if there's no hotel license by then the consequences will not be limited to lands department. The buildings department will also be involved. Mr. Au, Director of Lands, the time element. The existing license, it will last till 2018. Mr. Au, thank you, Chairman. Now, just now I said that under the BPR 23A, now the BPR when no hotel license was obtained or the license was not renewed, then under the BPR it can be treated as a change of use that would be in contravention of the rules. Next, Mr. Chen Lam. I think we have rule of law in Hong Kong. Anyone, whether it's the owner or the buyer, in deciding to sell or buy a property, he must be clear on his own rights and the future developments. Now, looking at the sales brochure, which we have on hand now on page 1, it's very clear that when what is being sold is a hotel property and not a residential unit. And it says very clearly that anyone who buys the unit should know that he is buying a hotel unit room and not a residence. Now, the question is, within a very short period of time, would there be estate agents who would be very eager to come up with to arrive at the deal, and so might have misled the potential buyer or have left out some legal stipulations in the information provided to the prospective buyer. Now, looking at the document, it seems that many things are clear. As a buyer, you should know that you are buying a hotel property and it's not for self-occupation. And this has to be clearly looked at by the authorities to see whether there is a problem with somebody somewhere. And the Director of Lands mentioned that the definition is still not clear, so it has to wait till the law enforcement stage. Now, this is not ideal, so I would like to ask, as an example, now this case has occurred in enforcement in the future. How does the government department concerned enforce the law? For instance, Apex Horizon, the units have already been sold. The relevant government departments, do they regularly inspect the properties? And we have not just Apex Horizon, there are other similar service apartments. Do the relevant government departments regularly inspect these rooms? How do they define whether the rules are being followed? First, concerning the sales brochure, perhaps Mr. Wong, the EAA, yes, the estate agents ordinance regulates the sale and purchase of residential properties, and the establishment of the estate agents authority regulates the estate agents in their operations through licensing. Now, in the early sales of the property, we obtained some sales brochures, and we understood that the developer was promoting the sale of a commercial property, and we were very concerned how the estate agents, whether they complied with the code of practice. So when we received the complaints, if we find that the estate agent has done something improper, we will open a file and investigate, and we will exercise sanction if appropriate. Now, as for inspection, I asked the Lands Department and the HAD to respond briefly. Now, as for the enforcement of other leases, at any time we can inspect the properties with leases at any time when there are points of doubt. What's a point of doubt? How do you discover that? Next, the HAD, Mr. Kwok. Now, as I said earlier, now we regulate the building and fire safety, and so we ensure that the OLA will check and find that the premises meet all the licensing requirements, including building and fire safety, before the license is renewed. Now, according to the HAGAO, the OLA personnel can at any time reasonably enter the premises and ask the person concerned to produce all relevant information. Next, Ms. Claudia Mo, and then Mr. Alan Leong. Ms. Mo. Thank you, Chairman. Now, today the Secretary for Development is leading a team of department heads, and all the officials are here. They are all very serious. Now, however, the fact is that even in 2003, the government was aware of the problem, and they plugged the loophole, but the leases before 2013 could not be changed. 8 years later, in 2011, you approved the case for Apex Horizon. Why is it that the government never alerted the people? Because the property market is very sensitive. Now, of course, this is the previous administration, you might say, but this Mr. C.Y. Leung has been in office for over half a year. Why is it that nothing has been said so far? And when the problem now surfaces, then you point out all the what's wrong, all the things that are wrong. Now, so if someone buys the property, he would be in contravention of the law. The director of lands is very gentle, but actually it's very aggressive. It's being said that if you are trying to take advantage of the loophole, we will get you. Now, and the secretary just said that this is something new. The government is not clear about what's happening. The secretary said that he has to seek legal opinion, and the director said that it can't be ruled out that the case would go to court. So the government hasn't doing its job for the people, and you are either in the dark about what you are doing, you are ignorant, or you deliberately try to cover up. Now, this is unacceptable. This is dereliction of duty. Previously, you were amiss in your judgment. Now you are derelict in your duty. Do you admit that, Mr. Secretary? Secondly, you must answer this. Now, looking at the newspapers, Ming Pao, a similar development in Hong Kong, approval has been granted for approval of over 2,000 hotel rooms to be sold separately. Can you confirm that? Hoi Wan Hin and also Hoi Wan Hin, they are both of the Cheung Kong Group. For these two property developments, can you confirm those? Now, Chairman, as I said at the beginning in my briefing, now, if there is no restriction for separate sale of hotel rooms, then if the hotel owner has to follow. Certainly, I don't want to be rude, but as Mr. Abraham Shek said, please don't repeat what's obvious. I know what's happening. I'm asking, why is it that the administration has been in place for over half a year, has never mentioned this, and now the problem arises, and you say that the buyers are dumb. You owe it to Hong Kong people. Please don't start from the beginning over again. Well, I must start from somewhere. Please be brief. Now, I've done my best to be brief, but I do not accept that in facing this issue, we have been derelict in our duty. That is not the case. We are being very responsible in making our call to the public, let me reiterate, as the lease does not rule out separate sale of rooms, therefore the separate sale of rooms by the developer is not in contravention of the lease. Now, it all depends on whether the buyer was made aware of what he's buying in the information provided, and on whether the rooms are still being used as hotel rooms, and they are in keeping with the relevant requirements. Next, Mr. Alan Leong, and then Ms. Ann Chang. Chairman, now, if there are now buyers who are watching the TV and they hope to hear some explanation by government officials to determine whether they should make the main deposit, then they would be at a loss. The Civic Party and myself received some requests for assistance in the past few days, but we can't see a general case. The director and the secretary could not make it clear cut. Now, so we can only tell them to ask their lawyers. Now, just now, the person who has been most ambivalent is Ms. Ling. Now, such approaches, taking advantage of certain provisions. Now, the government, in its planning, would take into account the number of tourists arriving in Hong Kong to determine how many hotel rooms there should be. Now, there are so many leases dated before July 2003 without prohibition of separate sale of hotel rooms. How would the government remedy the situation? Now, according to Ms. Ling, first you would have a test case in court, and then you have a court case, and then you find out who is what constitutes breaching of loophole, and is that the way you determine it, the director? Now, if we look at the documents for separate sales right now, well, we are still reading the documents, so I can't make a general case, but the developer does say that it's for hotel use. When you buy the unit, you have to hand it over to an operator. You can have no say on to whom it will be rented. So it appears to be a hotel use. But why is the government highly concerned about this? Now, it's all because on the day of the open sale, it seems that we hear from the media there are comments by certain people that self-occupation or renting to one's family members. Now, we hear such comments when we think that there's a problem. So then it occurs to us, was it made clear to the buyer, prospective buyer in the sale process? Now, if someone who buys the property thinks that he will let the operator rent out the room and he has no say, then he wouldn't need to worry about whether he is in contravention, but he treats it as his own residential home. Then it's not possible, it's not allowed. And there are many marginal cases. It depends on the actual development.
But it depends on the purchaser. They must have a clear intention. They must either have an intention of using it as a private property or very clearly knows whether or not they know they're buying a hotel room and then giving it to the operator to run as a hotel. Now, I don't want to be rude, Chairman, but I want to ask very simply that after all the documents you read, I don't want to ask the purchaser. I'm asking, in terms of the developer, the hotel operator, when they're doing this, is what you, is it, as you said, that it is, they're trying to find a loophole. Because I think that the government found that there was a problem in 2003. That's why you had to change the law. But now there's a problem here, and this was actually approved by the official to sell the hotel in this way. So now you said that you're a bit too late to discover the problem now. You said very clearly that you can't take advantage of loopholes, that a purchaser and hotel must know very clearly what is happening. So now you've read all the documents. So you can't even have a position even now. So I think that you are a bit too late in discovering the true positions. Next is Ms. Ann Chung. Thank you, Chairman. I just heard from Ms. Lin that in the past there was no interference because they heard some they should interfere later is because they heard that the developer is selling to citizens, and some of the citizens think that they can let their relatives or their children live or let themselves live in these units. So that's why the government's interfered. So if that is the case, so if you are not letting your children or your relatives or yourself live in this property, and then if that is the case, then that particular deal would be legal. Is that the case? Then would you accept it? Can you please answer briefly? Ms. Lin. I'm sorry, member. I can only say that if they only use those, if they use the property in that way, then it's not legal. But I can't comprehensively list what intentions the purchaser would have. I can't say very clearly because that would be misleading the citizens. I think that whole thing is very complicated, and it gets more complicated the more you think about it. Because a lot of citizens, after they buy such property, so they've already bought it, so now they don't know if they should complete the deal now. But now they hear the government is saying that if you buy the property, that it may be that now sometimes the banks don't want to provide mortgage, and some lawyers don't really want to deal with this particular transaction and say that they should sign particular provisions that's saying that the lawyers bear no responsibility and it's only the purchasers bear all the responsibility. And of course that's not very fair to the citizens. And now I hear is that you can't live yourself, you can't let your relatives or your children live there. And I look at the provisions of the hotel as saying that the purchaser, if the lease or anything, must have to be done through the management company. And if it's not through the management company, then the owner themselves cannot lease it out. So it seems that they are in a very difficult position. They can't sell or not sell, and they can't live there themselves, and they can't lease it out. If it's so complicated, maybe the government should sit and discuss this with the developer. Discuss it very clearly and not use the citizens as put them in a difficult position. Any answers? Secretary. Chairman. Looking at the media reports, I see that some people, even though we have came out and say that purchasers have to be very clear as to what they're buying and what the risks are, I do see that there's some media reports that some people know that this is a hotel room unit and there are risks involved, but they do think that the returns are acceptable to them, so they are willing to buy. So I think that in these circumstances, the purchaser themselves, in making an investment decision, have to make their own decisions in regards to their own risk-bearing ability. I want a secretary. I want to ask, when this piece of land was granted to the developer, what was how was the price? So you're saying that you sold it as a hotel usage, and so is the price reflected in this? What is the comparison between a non-hotel hotel use and a parcel of land that is a residential use? Director of Lands, please. In granting this piece of land is based on the user. It's a non-industrial use, and the conditions clearly state that the minimum GFA has to be used for hotel. And then, based on this consideration, they set a price for this parcel of land. So what does it mean? It means that it's much lower than residential land at the particular period of time. Chairman, at that time, we will definitely set a price in accordance with the market price, in accordance with that condition. So it's saying that the developer in selling this piece of land is not just that they're not following some regulations and that there are problems with regulations. It means that in terms of the premium, they save a lot in terms of not having to pay the premium. Now, Chairman, at this point, the developer, when they tell us, so at this point, they're telling us that the user remains hotel. So right now, there's no issue with premium. In the future, and regarding on, it really depends on whether they want to apply to change the user. Are you very clear? Yes. Okay, then. Mr. James Tian and then Mr. Wu Shiwei. Mr. James Tian. Thank you, Chairman. Now, as a member, we're all concerned with this concern. And of course, as the chairman of the HKTB, I'm even more so. Now, if the Hong Kong hotel, if there are not enough hotels and not enough rooms because there's so many visitors and they have to live in Shenzhen, if we have so many hotel use regulations that are not clearly written back then, and then if a lot of hotel rooms are converted to residential usage, and from the point of view of visitors and HKTB, there'd be a great cause of concern. But I do want to ask for clarification. The Secretary just once said, before 1st of July 2003, some of the regulations in terms of hotels is not clearly written, and afterwards it is clear. It means that one person, that the hotel is only owned by one person and cannot be sold separately. But it seems that before 1999, the law is between 1999 and 2003, the government put forth a lot of parcels of land, and there are different distinctions. One is that there's no longer any restriction for a single owner, and second is to allow for a deed of mutual covenant. So is this correct? So saying that there are more than 10 hotels, they can, not that they will, but they can do this. So perhaps we don't have to be worried that around 200 or so, or 100 or 200 or so hotels are doing it this way, that are built after 2003. Another thing that we want to ask about this Apex Horizon, if the government has a position it has, why is it in the 2011 February, or I should say in May or so, the government had approved a proposed subdeed of mutual covenant management for the Apex Horizon. So in that situation, why did the government approve such a deed of mutual sub-deed of mutual covenant? Thank you. So these two questions are very important questions, and I hope to give the director a comprehensive answer so everyone will be clear. Director, please. Chairman, first, in terms of hotel usage land, have we changed our policy at one point? Because we have always held the position that in 2003, on July 1st, we said that from that date, any new parcels of land that are approved, or if it's amendment of a land lease, if it is for hotel use, we say that they must sell it by en bloc. So such an arrangement is really implemented after the 1st of July 2003. In the past, for individual parcels of land for a hotel, it's really not have this strict restriction. If they are only done individually. I think that some members think that there were some discussions during those few years about service apartments. And then near the end of the 90s, there were a lot of serviced apartments. At that time, most of the serviced apartments have the restriction that they cannot be sold, or must only be sold en bloc, because they are managed centrally. So if they sell them, you have to sell en bloc. But after 2000, no matter in terms of planning or in terms of land policy, we do not use the term of service apartments. So it's either a hotel or either it's a residence. And both of these duties. So I just want to know, what is the Apex Horizon? Now, because the Apex Horizon was approved in 2002, so it's called a hotel. It's very clear that it is a hotel. So I hope that she can answer me. Now, in 2011, in May, did you issue a letter to Apex Horizon? So why did you wrote such a letter to Apex Horizon so that they should have a DMC, that is a subdivided share? Thank you. So any determination of DMC or sub-DMC must be based on whether or not the building can be sold separate, individually. If there's no restriction on the individual units being sold, as I said before, we must follow the spirit of the contract, and so they can be sold not just en bloc. And then they must be doing it, and before they can sell it, they must make such DMCs and sub-DMCs as accordance to the land lease in order to protect each of the individual owners and of the responsibility because they have a responsibility to collectively manage the building. So we're doing this because of the respect of the spirit of the contract. Okay, Mr. Hu Chiwei is not here now. Deputy Chairman Mr. Tony Te. Thank you, Chairman. Now, we're saying that Hong Kong is a free market and it's based on a rule of law. Of course, we allow some people, if they are fulfilling all the regulations, to undergo various transactions, such as mentioned by the Secretary and the Director of Lands, is that the developer is selling hotel units. It's in accordance to the lease as well as relevant regulations. Of course, I think that providing investment opportunities with people, if you take another viewpoint, for example, some people also always want to buy hotel, but we don't want to buy it en bloc, but I am interested in buying a hotel room. But now in terms of selling individual hotel rooms, I looked at the agreements. It seems that there are not very many cases. So I think that the government, what I feel is that the government, in terms of asking people to be concerned, is because a lot of purchasers are really not familiar because they think that they can live there themselves. I think it shows that the government was a bit slow in the response because I think that when they first made the first warnings, most people have already bought the units. So I hope that the government will be concerned about this. So in the future, how can we be more strict and to prevent this from happening? Because if we don't want buildings that have been designated to be hotel use, we don't want them to be non-hotels or to be a strange hybrid. So I hope the government will take concern about this because the operating is very important in hotel, and that is in terms of collective management. So I do see that there is a third party that is operating the building. It's very different from other sales. So even when you are handing over the unit, it must be from the seller to the buyer. But now the seller is actually just handing it to the operator in lieu of the purchaser. So perhaps the person who's selling it has considered a lot for this. But now I think it's a bit unequal. So I do hope that the government will help Chairman because help with a lot of citizens because they're not familiar with such complicated transactions, and I hope the government will do more. And actually, in terms of the regulations in regards to hotel, such as licensing, it is because there may be similar situations later. So I think that you must do some work now to tighten such regulations, but we hope that, Secretary said, that the purchasers really need to understand what they're buying. If they do want to invest in a hotel, it wouldn't matter if we tighten the regulations to make sure that a hotel remains a hotel. So I do hope the government will study this because the hotel operation is very important, and it's really really important as well for Hong Kong tourism. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you. We will carefully consider the concerns raised by the members. Thank you. This is Dr. Kenneth Chan. Thank you, Chairman. I think that Mr. James Tan don't have to be worried. Now it's only one hotel and only 360 units. But I would like to ask in terms of policy. before the 2003 July, you're saying that you allow such practice. Isn't that correct? That is, you have one particular lease, and then so you have all these divided into individual units. So what was the objective of such a policy? Why did the government do this? Is it that at that particular time the government had considered that this policy had a particular objective in mind? This is the first question. I hope there is a concrete answer, but if you can, please give a written submission later. Second is that right now we still don't know, after the sales, what is the supply of, whether the supply of hotel rooms in Hong Kong has increased or decreased. Nobody knows this. I think the regulation has a problem, so I can't say that the government has no responsibility here. Thirdly, now the Director of Lands has stated that perhaps in some circumstances, some circumstances would be considered to be hotel usage, and some others would not be considered hotel usage. Now, if there's one particular unit out of these 360 that is in violation of the regulations, how would it affect the others? Now, the Secretary just said at the beginning, it says that there must be a punishment, which includes but not restricted to re-entering. So I would like to ask, what other actions can you take? Last, Chairman, I want to say is that this is a very complicated problem. It requires more time. So I've already given you a letter, and I hope that it also invites Cheung Kong as well as the operating company to explain what exactly they're doing here. Thank you. Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the first point about the tightening of the law after 2003 as to what happens if one particular unit violates a regulation out of the 360, what would happen? I think the Director will answer that. Director of Lands, please. Thank you, Chairman. Perhaps we can, let's not talk about hotel usage in terms of land lease first. If it's a general land lease, if there are no particular usage, we don't have any provisions to prevent people from selling it individually. So we do hope that owners can use it freely. But why is it a hotel? In the middle of 2003, we had an intention of add this provision because during that particular time, as I stated in the documents, there were a lot of applications to the town planning board to change the land usage, to change it to a hotel user. So it seems that there was a big trend to have hotels. So we also looked at the planning plans, is that a lot of hotel units are designed seems to be very similar to residential units. That is, they're bigger, and then they also have a living room, etc.
So we noted that there were public concerns around there, and then we thought that we might as well add a clause to the lease to prevent the sale of such rooms on an individual basis to plug abuse. So that was with the benefit of hindsight, and then for leases approved for 2003 that could be done. So this is a very serious loophole in the policy. Well, that so-called loophole. Well, the tourism and the hotel industries are developing all along. Prior to 2003, now for many leases currently do not prevent the sale of rooms individually. Well, in fact, this is only the first case of hotel rooms being sold individually. So in July 2003, we noticed the design of rooms and also an increase in applications. Before that, there was no such trend. It was not that there has been a loophole all along, and then we suddenly decided to plug it in 2003. And Dr. Chen said that there are 360 rooms. If there is one room violating the clause, well, we specify the minimum GFA for hotel use in the lease. So if just one single room has breached the regulations, then the lease conditions are breached. Then as the owner, we can, of course, ask for recovery of the site. However, how we're going to handle the case will violation by one single room cause everyone to suffer. I think we have to discuss with lawyers in details first. Ms. Sit-Ho, to be followed by Ms. May-Kun. Ms. Sit-Ho. I thank the administration for showing us a provisional PSA for information. That is the provisional PSA of Apex Horizon. It's made very clear that as the owner of a hotel room, it has to ensure that the room is being used as a hotel and is also part of the hotel. Well, in fact, the fonts are very small, but I think it is Lehman Brother mini bond incident, but property sector style. So I want to know whether the buyers are aware of the various restrictions in the lease. Well, some buyers talk to the press that the rooms were cheap and they would want to buy it for their children, because it appears that they didn't understand what the conditions in the PSA was about. So this is very similar to the case of Lehman Mini Brother incident. Is it because of a panic caused by a housing policy? So prospective buyers thought that they could not afford to miss that golden opportunity. So before they had read the conditions carefully, they decided to buy their rooms. Well, the Secretary has led a team of civil servants to tell us that there is nothing in the law to prevent it from being sold in this manner. But I think is it your policy intention to allow the rooms to be sold individually? Yes, you want more operators to join the hotel industry, but you in fact did not expect that in a development with 360 rooms, there would be 360 operators. Perhaps Mr. Ning, the director, can explain to us whether that's the original intent of the government. And these mini-bond case in the property sector, the government has responsibility to follow up everyone is here except the Consumer Council. I think the government should join hands with the Consumer Council. It's hard for owners, for buyers to seek legal advice. And if they bought the rooms in panic, I think it is the government's responsibility to offer them legal assistance. You can't really expect individual room owners to stand against such a big property developer in the court. We have representatives from the Real Estate Agents Authority. If there are buyers who think that they've been misled into buying hotel rooms of Apex Horizon, I'm sure they can lodge an appeal or complaint to the authority. And I understand that the Consumer Council issued a press release to remind buyers. I'm sure the Consumer Council will also accept complaints from the public. Will the administration provide initial legal advice to buyers? I don't think they can pass the income and asset tests for legal assistance or legal aid, but will you at least provide preliminary legal advice? At this stage, we have no intention to do so because we have to consider the merits of each case. We can't have a general decision. Well, for legislators, we also accept the cases one by one. All right. There were many questions, although they were not clearly answered. Ms. May-Kun, Secretary or the Director, said a number of times that selling hotel rooms separately is something new, when in fact it is not. Dr. Kenneth Shen asked why was such an amendment in 2003. I can tell you that in Chengyi, there is another serviced apartment, and that was sold using sub-DMCs, And then the government amended the legislation. Now, on the 10th of July 2003, the Quarry District Council discussed this issue, but perhaps the District Council were too humble for the government to listen. In the same developer in 2002 changed a hotel to subdivide into a service department, and then in 2002 applied for the hotel rooms to be sold separately, and the government understood that there would be a problem. So the category of service department was removed, and secondly, the law was amended to impose restriction on alienation of hotel developments. Now, for this case, the flats were sold by sub-DMCs. According to guidelines, in 1999, rooms of service apartments could be sold, and then in 2003, the problem was identified, and so a restriction was imposed. So I really pity the government, because there are so many government officials here serving the same property developer. So they started this category of service apartment, and then you amended the law, and so no matter how tight your legislation is, the developer is able to circumvent your requirements. They are able to use the gray areas and to abuse the loopholes and do what they want. In 2003 November, an official from the Land's office told us that in Quarry there are two similar service apartment developments, one in Chang Hub Road and the other on Wo Yi Hub Road. I'd like to know whether the one on Wo Yi Hub Road is Apex Horizon. If not, what is the name of that development? And then when premium was paid, well, there was a paper from Chang Kong, but the premium was paid before the DMC was subdivided. So even though this is regarded as a non-residential zone, I'd like to know how the premium was calculated. Because the premium would be different if the development was to be sold en bloc. First, on the question of premium. Well, we follow the conditions in the lease in calculating a premium. There is no restriction on the sale of rooms separately. So there's no question of lowering the premium with the consideration that the rooms might be sold separately. Now, does that mean that there is underpayment of premium? No. Back then, there was no restriction in the lease to disallow that. What about Nam Ching Wan and also Apex Horizon? So in 2003, you were fooled once. Why is it that here you are fooled again? Is there a problem with the Lands department or what? I'm afraid I don't have the name of the development here. But as I said, hotels and service apartments are two different things. It's true that it's only starting from July 2003 that we have restriction on alienation of hotel developments. And I understand that there is a process of evolution. When we still had service apartments, there were times when the development was not allowed to sell individually, separately, but en bloc. And there are also developments that call themselves service apartment. But when it comes to for the sake of the lease, it has to be specified whether it is a hotel or a residential development. If it is both, well, before 2003, there were projects where there was no restriction on the sale of rooms individually. Okay, Mr. Fong Kim K. The Deputy Director of Home Affairs told us that if the license is revoked, then the hotel or the development cannot be used for hotel purpose or for residential purpose. Is that correct? Mr. Kwok. CAP. We explained the application of CAP 349C. Well, if a development is not covered by hotel license, then it cannot be used as a hotel. So it's either yes or no. I can only say that if a place satisfies our definition of a hotel, and unless it is subject to exemption, it has to obtain a license before operation. Well, if it is operating as a hotel or guest house with a license and lease led to tenants on the base less than continuous period of 28 days, then it has breached the relevant legislation. The question, if a development is not covered by a hotel license, then it cannot operate as a hotel. Now, we don't have to wait until 2018. If come next year, after all the units are sold and Cheung Kong decides to give up its hotel license, then there is no protection for owners of the hotel rooms at all. The development cannot be used for residential use, neither can it be used for a hotel. There is no protection for the owners of hotel rooms at all. Is it correct, Director? Now, if a development wants to operate as a hotel, and if there are rooms let to tenants for less than 28 continuous days, then it has to apply for hotel license from HAD. But if the rooms are all let to tenants for a continuous period of over 28 days, theoretically it is a hotel. No, the question is, all the units or all the rooms have been sold to different owners. If after that, Cheung Kong decides not to renew its license or give up the license voluntarily, then under 4E of the conditions, there is no liability on Cheung Kong at all. It can just go away. So for individual owners, they cannot apply for a license. They are not capable of so doing. So theoretically, there is no protection for owners of hotel rooms at all. Well, I cannot interpret the operating agreement of the hotel owner on their behalf. I think owners are expected to set up an owners committee, assuming that the current operator doesn't apply for a license, and these owners will continue to operate a hotel there. I don't know the possibility that they can apply for a license separately. And from the lease perspective, we will only consider whether the place is still being used as a hotel with the minimum GFA for hotel. Well, if the place is no longer covered by hotel license, well, we will consider whether it is being used as a hotel use in the common sense or common knowledge. So you assume that owners of hotel rooms can form a corporation to apply for license. This is against common sense. And according to the Secretary, there is no restriction in the resale of rooms, but this is wrong. If you consider paragraph 14 of the operating agreement, the second-hand market is very limited. the owners have to comply with a set of conditions. This can be seen clearly in the operating agreement. I'd like to know whether buyers of hotel rooms understand these requirements. I was only referring to the lease perspective, and I think owners and buyers should seek their individual legal advice. Thank you. Mr. Keke Fong, to be followed by Mr. James Till. Thank you, Chairman. I have 3 questions. All right, for buyers of rooms of Apex Horizon, or rather for the developer or the owner of Apex Horizon, has there been any announcement to mislead mislead the public into thinking that it is just ordinary sales of residential units? Secondly, I understand that the owner once sold a hotel room of Apex Horizon, though the government remained silent. So was it because the government was negligent in its duty? Or is it because now it is an overcorrection? Because no one has told it exactly what the problem is. So I'd like to know whether the government made any mistake. And according to my limited research, we have 80 or so similar hotels in Hong Kong. And all these hotels can follow the practice of Apex Horizon and have the rooms sold individually. How can the administration ensure that prospective owners know for sure that such rooms have restricted use? Does the administration plan to have clear regulation, very clear regulations on the 80 odd similar hotels we have in Hong Kong? Secretary, so far we have not received any complaints of buyers being misled into buying the hotel rooms of Apex Horizon. No, I'm not talking about complaints, but whether you have considered that there's been misleading information. Well, we are now reviewing what's in the media, and we, as a responsible government, we have to have access to all the information first before we make a judgment. Now, well, you don't have enough time, but for the sale of the hotel room, of the first hotel room, it took place long ago. So the government was negligent in that case. As I said, in the past few days, we have been asking for a large volume of information and also seeking legal advice. Regarding prospective investors, we can't say in the general sense, because investors may have different intentions, and we've reminded investors to be mindful of risks involved in such transactions. So when a buyer buy a property-related product, investment product, he has to be mindful of the risk involved.
Now, will the other 80-odd hotels have to abide by certain requirements? Well, it's too early yet. Well, I regret the administration has answered this way, and I reprimand that. And you did nothing at the time for Apex Horizon, and now it's closing the stable door after the horses have too late. So why do people do it all in a herd mentality? Because there wasn't enough supply, and people now think that they can buy and make a profit. It's all the responsibility of the government. Mr. Frederick Fong, please do not get emotional. Now, the Director of Lands can comment on the previous sale. Now, Chairman, firstly, I must make it clear that selling as separate units is not necessarily in contravention, and to sell in separate units doesn't require advance notification or permission. Now, in our work, we have to look up data at the lands registry. Now, in January, we find in such information that one unit was sold in December, and at the time, now we reminded them that when you sell by individual unit, you have to maintain the hotel use and maintain the minimum hotel use GFA. So we inquired of the developer, you sold one unit, have you abided by our requirements? We want to see your sale documents. Have you stipulated that it would be for hotel use? So we made that inquiry. Now, at that time, we could not make the assumption that there was contravention. Now, if the government make that allegation, there was no reasonable grounds for that, and so would it be premature to make it very publicized now? And then on 8th of February, we heard from the media. We noted in the media that some doubts are rising, so we became very concerned. So in the first sale, we made an inquiry, and it was found that no one was in contravention. These are Mr. James Toh, Abraham Shek, Chair Wai Paul Chair, Lam Tai Fai, Chen Kim Paul, and others. Mr. James Toh first. The developers use all kinds of ways to make the most profits within the law. Now, we ask the government to strictly enforce the law, but we cannot ask the government to go against the law or act outside of the law. Now, this is the first time I hear the Director of Lands, Ms. Ling. Now, I have high praises for her. She knows what she's doing. She knows what she can't do, what she should do, and she's familiar with the lease terms to know what are the enforcement actions she is entitled to take. Having heard from her, I am more confident that the government can ensure that the land will remain as a hotel use site and will continue to enforce the law strictly. Secondly, I try to use all my imagination, given my knowledge of the law, to decipher the issue of if someone does this, what will the Director of Lands do? Now, in the hotel operation agreement, that operator can determine the property price. Now, it appears to be fair because the property belongs to you. Now, say, for example, a room, 600 odd square feet, maybe $1,000 per night of rental, and I put in let it at $10,000, and so there are no more rooms around, so I have to rent your room. Now, I am the owner of the hotel room. I want to occupy the room as a hotel room long term, and I get somebody to clean it every day. The hotel personnel can come in and inspect any time. So I live there all the time, and how do I get the room? I go to the management of the hotel and I book the room as $10,000 per night, and I book it, and I know that after deduction of all the costs and charges, I received back $9,000. So how do you determine whether it's a residential unit or hotel room? Now, I changed nothing, even for feng shui reasons. Now, every day I go to the hotel room counter and get a key, and so is that a long-term occupation without contravening the hotel use in the lease, Ms. Ling? Now, I thank Mr. To for giving some indicators in what he says on how we might look at such cases in the future. Certainly, the amount of rent is something we will look at, because I said just now we will look at a basket of factors. If the rental doesn't resemble what people usually pay when they travel for a hotel room, we would consider that. And if that person merely gets the hotel key every day, but he lives there every day, then that room, normally, if I try to rent it, it may be very difficult for me to do so. So that might also be another factor in considering whether it still remains a hotel room. So that's what I meant by a basket of factors. These are examples of such factors. Oh, next, Mr. Abraham Shea. Just one sentence. Now, actually, I have other questions. I don't know what other members think. Maybe they want to ask the same thing. I hope there can be a special meeting for this. Let's leave this till later. Mr. Abraham Shea, and then Mr. Paul Chair. Chairman, I've sat here and listened for almost 2 hours. There are many assumptions in the questions. It's assumed that the people don't know what they are buying. It's assumed that it's a residential unit. It's assumed that the seller was deceiving them. Now, if you spend some time and read the documents on your table, on your desk, you will find that all these questions have been answered. The purchase and sale agreement makes it clear that they are buying a hotel room. It's run by a hotel, managed by a hotel, and they own the property right for a hotel, but they don't have the right to operate the hotel, and that's very clear in the agreement. Now, I asked Mr. Feng, why do you wait for the newspaper to tell you before you act? You would know when you look at the first case, you would have seen all the documents. You can't just say there's so much being alleged in the newspaper, then you assume the developer has infringed the law. That's not the spirit of Hong Kong's legal structure. No man's guilty until it's proven. It's like Ms. Ling saying that there's no definition for what's a hotel. There is. Please read the Town Planning Ordinance 131. I'll read for you.
Statutory plan. Hotel means any premises whose owner, occupier, or proprietor holds out that to the extent of his available accommodation, he will provide sleeping accommodation for any person presenting himself who appears able and willing to pay a reasonable sum for services and facilities provided and is in a fit state to be received. 咁呢，呢個 HECO 呢349。
Now, this is 349. So that HHAO accepted that. So it's not for the director to say. Now, the Basic Law Article 6 says we have the right on the property we own. Now, secondly, you have to respect the spirit of the contract. As Mr. James Toh said, you should be allowed to do what's legal. Now, and there's compensation. Now, It now appears as if you want to strike a blow at the developers to satisfy public opinion. That's not what the government should do. What's right should be enforced, and if what's wrong, if something wrong, you can prosecute them, not just respond to public opinion. Now, the senior officials all say things that scare the public into a panic. Now, people make investments. These 300-odd buyers are not stupid. Hong Kong people are very wise. You look at the contract. Is it not clear? Now, they act on that. Now, deed of mutual covenant is not approved in 1 month. You approved that over 1 year at least when you gave permission for the sale. Why is it that you now say you seek legal opinion? Now, I'm telling the government what to do. You say James tells you what to do and you thank him. You know all the law within the government. You have many people in the government. You look at it from the legal perspective, the perspective of the spirit of contract. Thank you. Now, concerning the definition of hotel, I think we should let Ms. Ling respond. I thank Mr. Shek for his admonitions. Now, I said that in the lease there was no definition of hotel, and because there was no such definition in the lease, therefore, when we look at the case, we can take into account many other definitions and considerations under common law. I'm sorry. Now, the definition for hotel and guest house, you should take the Town Planning Board definition. Now, you are very smart. You shouldn't talk like that. You say there is no definition. Now, every law has a clear definition. It says what can be done. It's not rule of person, but rule of law. Now, still I have to be very clear. Even though there are different legislation, the hotel may be defined differently. The fact is that in the lease there is no sentence saying that under this lease a hotel is equal to this and this and this. So when we interpret what is equal to what is a hotel, we take into account common law cases and other legislation. Chairman, the town planning ordinance and there's another ordinance on hotels, and all these should be taken into account. Next, Mr. Paul Chair and Mr. Chan-Pan. I am not a member of this panel. Thank you. Now, just a while, people are very concerned about the tourist agency, and it's felt that the agency infringed the law in respect of mainland tourists, and it was a very big matter. Now, administratively, the director may be very capable, but politically, we must deal with it tactfully. Now, if you say there are assumptions, then we don't deal with it. That's not right. Same for the layman case. The mainland visitors will take the government to task, and same in this case. It's something that can be foreseen. Now, if we don't deal with it administratively but politically, the government shouldn't just take the public and victimize them. You will know how to deal with the developers. You should resolve the matter. Let's not tussle on the terms. Now, what's a hotel? That's meaningless. The public will find themselves having all sorts of problems in a legal suit. Now you say there are no there's an absence of protection, and if there's no license in 2018, you cannot occupy the unit again. Well, they're already in occupation. Now, the developers should not employ lawyers who actually represent the developer only, but say they represent both sides. Such lawyers' firms are not right. Now, we can't say nothing is to be done if nothing has happened. Now, if we don't want to really hurt the victims, we should do something when we see the smoke and not yet the fire. Now, the government should clearly explain. Let's not talk about individual cases. If you look at all documents, there's already prima facie evidence showing that the developer has tried to act in less than honorable way. So you can talk about things in advance and try to resolve the matter. Now, if the developer well, in the old days, there is still there was so-called collusion between government and private sector, and things can still be resolved by mutual discussion. But now the link has been broken. Now some people say that the developer should be dealt with harshly. Others have different opinions. Now, to safeguard the consumers, preventive work should be done, because it's now very clear that problems have arisen. So you don't need to answer this, because in the past you conduct so-called inspection of hotels. Well, do we really believe that the lands department went and inspected because people lived there for a long time? Many managers lived in the hotels for long periods of time. Do you cancel their license? No, you didn't. Next, Mr. Chan Ben, and then Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Thank you, Chairman. It's clear that some people make use of the hotel plot ratios being higher than those for ordinary residential buildings, and so they build these hotels for sale. They want to make maximum profit. Some people say there's an issue of challenging government's authority. I think the developers and the government are partners. We live in the same society. We can talk to each other. So I agree with Mr. Paul Chair that we hope there would be discussion, not for their profit, but to provide more safeguard for those who have already bought the hotel rooms. Now, the developers have found loopholes to make profits. Well, that's enviable, but that's regrettable too. Why is it that these major developers have engaged such tactics? Now, I'd like to ask Mr. Au. Now, the hotels are defined as such if they have central air conditioning and central water heating. Now, the Apex Horizon do not have these facilities. Why would they approve back then? And I hope to leave more time for the administration. There were questions not yet answered. Can you answer them?
Would like to speak first, Mr. Au? Okay, thank you, Chairman. So when we were approving this particular project, it was very clearly showed that they would have no central air conditioning. And before we issued the occupation permit, we did go to the inside, and we did see that there is an air conditioning. Are you talking about ventilation? Or is it air conditioning? In this particular project, the ventilation has air conditioning. Perhaps can you look at it with more detail? Yes. Do you have any questions that remained unanswered? Now, Chairman, in terms of the questions, I think that we've answered all of them. And I think the members are eager to ask questions. So I would like to give them questions to ask questions. Now, I'm sorry, this is my time, so if you don't have anything to add, then perhaps I'll ask a question. Now, Mr. Gary Chen has said that if in one day, that let's say that they cannot form a owners committee and they can't have a license either. And then after 2018, what can these owners do? Can the official give more details about this? Can you say that in 2018, if, say, there is no more, they can't get a license? So do you have anything to, what can the owners do? Perhaps I'll ask Director of Lands. Chairman, I don't think I can give a very concrete answer, but I'll try. Now, if the in terms of the documents the government that participate in, such as the DMC as well as the sub-DMC, now both of those are approved by the government. Now, if the owners in that particular lot, in terms of management, they face some problems, then they have to handle it according to the DMC and the sub-DMC. If, in terms of, they don't know how to interpret these particular documents. Now, because we have approved them, we can help in this regard. But if we're talking about there's a hotel operations agreement, it's not something that's approved by the government, and we're not a signing party to this agreement. And this agreement is only between the operator and with those individual owners. Now, if there are any problems with this particular agreement, or I don't think at this particular moment I can give any suggestions about what they can do, because this is an agreement between the two of them. Okay. Next is Mr. Lam Kwok Hong, and then is Mr. Lam Tai Fai, a chairman. Like here, some officials, and now they're talking about buildings ordinance, and now saying that they should have an owners corporation. And then some also say that nothing can be helped. So what is the whole crux of this? I don't think we can blame Siwa Leung for this. This is something from the previous administration. I won't blame him now. I only blame that he cannot take care of such business. Now, I think you misunderstand the entire topic. No one is saying that you are helping Li Ka-shing. It doesn't matter. No one is saying that. Now, someone helped him. Now, in the common law, it's saying that we have to help those who are weak. Now, even though it is a sales and purchase, but the owner is it's a corporation that has used a lot of loopholes in the law on many occasions so that they can build a lot of property and then sell them. So I don't know if in this particular instance, do they want to get profits, or because they want to slap the government in the face. Now, I think you should ask the Secretary for Justice. And I think Lawrence Ma has made me confused. You have to ask the Secretary of Justice and get a legal opinion. I think today, Director of Lands has talking about how she understands the law. But you have a barrister, and his name is Jin Kwok Kum. And if he doesn't know, then you have to get someone else to do it. Now, this panel is to represent members to make sure that you are accountable to the citizens and to ensure protect their interests. Now, I won't protect the interests of Li Ka-shing because he is an extraordinary citizen. Now, I would like to ask that, very simply, how can you help all these several hundreds of owners, even though this is a commercial transaction? Now, because this particular problem is created by the previous administration, you face it now. Now, Paul Chen, you can't just say what you think. Now, you just say that it's something that is left over to me by Zhang Hyam-kun. But you can't just say that. So you cannot delay this now. You have to have a confrontation. You must have an attitude. And you have to tell the citizens that the government has done all they can to protect their interest. So even though you say that they already know that they're buying hotels, even if they are buying false products, it's only a transaction. So I think that you have to first get the opinion from Secretary for Justice. How do you think about this whole business? Second, you should find someone to sue the developer. Just get someone to sue the developer. Then you get an opinion. So you're just saying that you should get an interpretation of the law. So I think for this particular issue, I don't think you should delay. Now, I will forgive you on this because you have nothing to do with this loophole. You're just here. But some people always say that, why couldn't you see the loophole? I think that's very normal. You don't know when they will act. Okay, so now this thing has happened. And now you're saying, so you must do all you can to act. So you just keep on saying a lot of uncertainties. And these uncertainties is because there's only one government. It is after the 1997, there's still one government. So one executive branch. So if what has been done by the previous administration doesn't work, then you have to fix it. You can't just say that Donald Trum's affairs don't relate to me. Now, if you don't take care of this, there will be a political crisis, because it is really unjust. Now, because those people are relying on you. If you don't act as an arbitrator, there will be no just society. So I'm just warning you. I've stated it clearly. Okay. Okay, Dr. Lam Tai-fei. And then is Mr. Chen Kim-po. Thank you, Chairman. I kind of regret that I left this meeting. Now, this particular situation has caused a lot of concern from the government and the society at large. And the government has announced loudly that people should be careful. And now, discussing this with the officials, it seems that we are still at a point where we're studying the issue. That is, we have to hear legal advice. I don't hear any voices that talk about how we can help those who have already bought the units. You're just saying that you'd already warned them. Now, I heard so many answers and suggestions. I really don't understand. Now, has Hong Kong done anything that's illegal? Or I should say something that they violated the justice of society. And also, I don't know whether or not they immoral or unconscientious. And I don't hear any concrete statements from the government how Hong Kong was wrong or how they acted inappropriately. And of course, the government will not admit that they lost to the developer because the developer was so smart. But now, it seems that this is like during the time of Lehman mini bonds. Maybe the bank used immoral sales methods and the government did not monitor it appropriately, so a lot of innocent citizens suffer. So it seems this history history may repeat, and there's a big possibility of that. So the government has a lot of times used words to say people should be careful. But you can't say that what Hong Kong has done that's incorrect. It's just saying that in the market there's a fraudster and you shouldn't be lured. It's just saying that smoking is bad for your health. But there's still 360 people who are smoking. Now, smoking is different because you can quit smoking. How can you, if you have already bought the property, how can you revoke it? You have to pay a penalty. You have to state very clearly to people that there is a tempest, and so you shouldn't go out on the street. So I have several questions, and I want you to clearly say to the people, is Hong Kong a fraudster? Have they violated the law? If they have, where is the violation? Now, if they have violated the law, how will you enforce it? How will you help these 360 buyers? Perhaps that they have already bought the property. You can't tell them then that, oh, I've already given you a warning that there's a tempest outside and you already signed it. The problem is there are so many gray areas created by the government. It's not an ordinary property transaction. A lot of citizens don't understand the law. and they haven't learned the law. So what did your press release say? Before they purchase, the citizens should clearly understand the legal issues, and if there's a need, they need to get independent legal advice. Even now, you are seeking independent legal advice, and you're saying that citizens do it. The citizens certainly don't have so many resources and don't so many legal personnel. I think this particular sentence is useless. So my question is very simply today, as Chair Governor Foster, how has Chong Kong violated the law? Second, if there is such a problem, how do you help these 360 purchasers? Will you give them legal assistance? Will you help them sue? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. I completely do not accept what has been said by Mr. Lam, that there are any gray areas created by the government. I don't accept this. Second, now, I have already answered previously that I don't want to repeat it here. Okay, next. Mr. Chen Kim-po. Well, thank you, Chairman. So I've heard for more than 2 years, and I think that this is very meaningful today. I think I hear everyone here, then I will be very clear to understand that under the current law, if any investor they bought a unit for the purpose of buying as a hotel unit and not to live there for themselves, then that will be a completely lawful, then the government should not interfere. But if there are some particular purchasers, and if they bought it and they want to convert it to residential use, then the government has said very clearly that they can take action against them. So I think that the government should most importantly make sure the citizens and buyers understand the risks involved, including is that even if the purchasers are very keep the law, if one particular purchaser violates the law, then the other buyers will also be affected. And then so if they understand all the risk, I think the government has already taken all the responsibility that they can. And so these particular investors are maybe very smart, and even so if they are smart and then the government has already done all they can, I don't think they can blame the government later on. But the problem is actually that if these particular people are, as the agreement, they are only buying as an investment, there is a decrease of hotel units, so we're not really worried about that. But in fact, a lot of people will take advantage of legal loopholes. So these several hundred units, I think there's a great potential for problems later on. Now, if there's a problem, will the government really take back the piece of land? So I think the government is in a difficult position. So the more warning you say now, you get more protection later on. Another point is that if someone keeps on taking advantage of legal loopholes, I think that if you have methods, others also have countermeasures. So I think the government should think of how to tighten the measures, such as before 2018, you should tighten the regulations, or perhaps after 2018, to try to prevent purchasers will buy property even though they don't understand the risks and they're causing problems in the society. So I want to ask the government how they would do this. Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chen Kim-po's suggestions. In regards to other similar properties, that is, in terms of the law, will there be a tightening? As I've said before, so we are collecting information and we're seeking legal advice on this. The next step is that we will come back to the LegCo panel and discuss this further with members. Okay. Okay, Mr. Albert Chen and Mr. Yip Kok-him. Albert Chen. Now, Chairman, now I've been in a court all day, so I'm late. So I'm glad that I can still be here and talk about this important topic. Now, Chairman, now, this Chong Kong's methods of taking advantage of legal loopholes is really famous. Now, keep on criticizing Li Ka-shing because he's very good at being litigation, and he's always litigating with the government. So in terms of the law, if you fight him with litigation, I think that he can fight very easily by delaying. So because delay is just time, and time is money, and then money is just a matter of profit. So I think that we should criticize that he is trying to lie, trying to mislead, and trying to get unreasonable profits. Now, because of this land lease problem, this is not a new problem. A few years ago, in terms of the problem with Rambler's Crest, there was already a problem then. And then we should be a hotel, and now they are selling it now. Not just Cheung Kong is doing this. A lot of developers are changing service apartments and selling as residential. And now the government always says that they won't approve such grants. It was very clearly stated. I don't remember if it was Patrick Lau, that is. He was the director of lands. There was a lot of meetings. A lot of purchasers bought it, and then there were so many problems. It's like, oh, when you're approving the property, you're approving it for hotel usage. It seems that you don't care about a lot of residential issues. So I think a lot of purchasers were fooled. And you can't even sue them afterwards, including to Town Planning Board. If you want to find the application from Cheung Kong from Rambler's Crest, that is the environmental facilities in terms of noise abatements. I can't even get a report. Even though, no, we can only get the information if the developer will allow this. Otherwise, the Town Planning Board cannot give this particular report in terms of environment improvements report to the particular owners. That's so crazy. I am an owner, and I can't even get this. So a lot of people are fooled, and I think the government is allowing corporations to fool citizens, even though you say that you won't issue such types of grants, and now you're repeating, and in fact the situation is even worse now. So I would like to ask the government, because a few years ago I talked to the Consumers Council and I anticipated this problem, and I asked the Consumers Council to make advertisements to find data and information. So because the evidence perhaps will be disappear later. So I think it's very clear that there's a misleading aspect here. Now the government may not have a direct role, but I think you should apply for an injunction to prevent them. That is to immediately get the lease back. And then, let the Cheung Kong sue you. If you just say that, oh, you re-enter, and then all the agreements will be ineffectual. And the law, if you can't do anything, then it just proves that you are just tolerating them unreasonably, and that means you are completely incompetent. So I want to see what your answer will be, and I hope that the Consumers Council will, as soon as possible, open. I think that all the consumers should contact Consumers Council. I think you already won in terms of Mount Butler situation. I think it's very clear that there's a case of misleading here. So I think that the Consumers Council should gather up the people who are fooled. The government is completely incompetent, and the Consumer Council should not be so incompetent.
多謝主席，我簡單回應一下，就係之前所講過呢，就係呢個分拆出售嘅單位，如果本身呢日後呢都繼續係呢個酒店用途嘅話呢，佢係並冇違反土地契約嘅。剛才涂謹申議員呢亦都有提過，作為政府呢，我哋係唔可以，亦都正如涂謹申議員哋所講呢，就唔能夠要求政府做一啲違反法律或者超出法律範圍裡面嘅事情。多謝主席。
好啊。
喂，你家下喂主席家政府個調子，頭先我頭半句我唔喺度啦。政府家自成係將呢個嘅買賣合法化喎，講到話佢冇違反呢個契約喎。開頭就話有疑問，你誤導都係違反契約㗎嘛？你誤導嗰個嘅用途都係違反契約㗎嘛？點可以話冇違反契約啊？你家下？哇！你家局長之前幫呢個嘅長實好似喺度推銷同埋呢個辯護咁喎，話佢家咁賣法冇違反呢個契約喎。你睇晒所有嘢啦，你好多宣傳嘅刊物同埋好多當時話賣嘅用途係有誤導成分啊嘛。
好，下一位好嘛？葉國軒議員，
多謝主席。即係對於今次長實咧，即係用咁樣嘅方式去賣。呢個賺到盡呢種做法咧，我同阿陳芬議員我好同意嘅觀點，真係好遺憾，即係造成咗一個咁樣嘅即係咁嘅境況。不過咧，我又好同意啊涂謹申議員頭先所提及到嘅，我高興係睇到咧政府而家知道自己做緊咩位置，呢 呢個好重要。即係我哋要喺現有嘅法律上邊要睇到，我哋應該可以。
We should know what we can do under the current legislation, and we should encourage or protect consumers. And if there is any loophole found in the lease, we should plug it and defend or protect consumers' interest. After this incident, will there be similar happenings? Recently, I went to Mount Shan, and I think there is a similar service department there. I asked a tenant, and he is renting a room there on a monthly basis at $13,000 per month, and he is responsible for electricity and not for water charges, and he cannot change the partition or the decoration of the room. And if he wishes to have a hotel, to have to have services, then he has to pay separately. So, well, the Apex Horizon be an example for other similar developments to follow. I'm quite concerned. And para 24, because I was late, and para 24 is about re-entry by the government. I like the administration to explain what this means. Director. Well, I would not be specific. I would not be specific about the case involved. Now, if I have this case in front of me, a room is rented on a monthly basis, is against the lease conditions. It depends on whether the lease is for a hotel or service department or a residential development. Now, if it is a service department, then the lease condition is not breached. If it is for a hotel, then there are suspicious points. It would depend on how long that tenant has stayed there. And if it is really a hotel site, we have demanded the minimum GFA for a hotel, and if the lease is breached, then the government can enforce the lease conditions, and there is a process to follow. Of course, the easiest thing for us to do is to attach an order to the lease, but in the most extreme case, we will re-enter the site. However, one thing is arguable is the lease requires a minimum GFA for hotel. Now, if one hotel has breached, one room has breached that term, of course, there's some blemish. And strictly speaking, the government can take action against all the owners. But of course, any action will have to be reasonable and legitimate. In the past, there were cases involving industrial buildings. If for a particular unit there's violation of the lease, will only target at that particular flat. But I won't be too general here. I won't be too concrete here, because the powers allowed to us is rather wide. Well, we have spent quite some time on this topic. I believe we should end the discussion here. Should we convene a special meeting to discuss this? Well, I was coming to that. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary, and your colleagues for answering our questions. If necessary, I may convene a special meeting to deal with this matter. Ms. Jiang, if necessary, I can convene a special meeting to discuss this. Am I allowed to speak now? Please allow me to finish first. In the interest of time, I like to complete our discussion on progress report on heritage conservation initiatives first, and because we have to stop by 6:30, we may not have enough time to deal with agenda item 7, that is planning study on future land use and Edison Road Quarry. Do members agree that we put this to the next meeting, which has a rather short agenda? We've only got the quality of Dongjiang water for the next meeting. So can we defer the Anderson Road Quarry item to the next meeting? All right. Thank you very much, Secretary, for your response. Mr. Kenneth Chen. Ms. N. Chen, you want to speak? No. I just want to speak on the next item. Mr. Kenneth Chen has written to me suggesting that we invite the relevant developer to attend our meeting to answer members' questions and to provide relevant information and documents. On the 22nd of this month, I circulated a letter to members. So do members support Mr. Kenneth Chan's proposal? Does any member wish to speak? Do we support Mr. Kenneth Chan's proposal? Mr. Abraham Sheck. Now, we are here to monitor the government, not private organizations. The administration claims that would like to look into the matter, and I personally do not support Mr. Chan's proposal. For those who are for Mr. Kenneth Chan's proposal, hands up, please. Chairman, perhaps I should make it clearer to Mr. Abraham Sheck. We are not asking to examine or cross-examine the developer, and we are still awaiting further replies from the administration. Well, we have the purchase and sale agreement in front of us. Chairman, if I may be bold to suggest this, if we have a special meeting to discuss this, then we may as well invite the developer to attend our meeting. This is a simple matter. I'm sure the public would expect to get an answer through open meetings of the council. Well, if we have a special meeting, perhaps we can write to the developer, and as a matter of courtesy, we invite them to come and ask if, and they can decide whether they wish to do so. Mr. Abraham Sheck, have we decided that we're going to have a special meeting? Do members wish to? Well, we will convene a special meeting if necessary. Now, let me declare interest. I'm representative of READER, but READER is not, of course, not related to this matter. But there is no need to convene a special meeting. We can put a list of questions to the government as well as the developer and wait for the replies. If we're not satisfied with the replies, then if necessary, we can convene a special meeting. That would be better. Mr. Chen Kamlan. Well, more than 20 colleagues have asked questions on this issue, and I think we have had a very detailed understanding of the matter. And as the administration said, it is now trying to understand this matter. So I hope that we will only convene a special meeting if we see special issues. Otherwise, it will be rather pointless if we repeat the questions already asked today. Well, if we invite the developer to come, we must do so with good justifications. Otherwise, some of us here may ask the developer how you sold those flats, and some of us might scold the developer because as we all know, there are grudges between the developer and some of us here, and this is not very fair to the developer. Well, if we are courteous, well, we may say that we're just trying to sort things out with him. If not, we might appear to be cross-examining him, and this is not so fair. Let's wait and see whether the administration has further information for us and whether we need to find out more. So that's why I say that a special meeting will only be convened if necessary. When I support you, Chairman, you said that you will keep a close eye on this matter, and when necessary, a special meeting will be convened. I support your decision. And well, when you convene a special meeting, then you should consider the proposal by Mr. Kenneth Chan, set out in his letter dated the 20th of February. Perhaps the developer has something to say to us as well. All right, we will keep a close eye on the development of this matter, and we will convene a special meeting when necessary. All right, if there are no further points, item 6. Progress report on heritage conservation initiatives. Please invite the government to come in, representatives from the administration to come in.
咁就都係歡迎出席嘅政議。
Let us welcome from the administration representatives for this item. Which one will walk us through the paper, please? The Commissioner for Heritage will introduce the paper to members. Oh, all right. All right. Secretary, thank you. Since 2009, the the Development Bureau has been making regular reports to the Council panel on development, our heritage conservation initiatives. This is a report since the last time. First, rejuvenating or revitalizing our historical buildings. Last week, I just mentioned our progress. Tiger Balm Garden will be revitalized. There will be music training and outreaching activities there. And as for the market, it will be as regards the former North County Magistracy, it will be turned to new development. As for Kingy Lane, I have accepted the recommendation that no proponent be selected, but we will do it again. Well, 3 items have been chosen, and we will assist successful applicants to carry out the advanced preparation work, and for the various revitalization programs, we will seek funding from the government. And since the launching of the revitalizing historic buildings through partnership scheme, there have been 3 badges, and some of the buildings or projects already in operation, including the former North County Magistracy, Old Taiho Police Station, and also former Lai Chi Kok Hospital. As for Fong Yun Study Hall and May Ho House, and the second stage of former Lai Chi Kok Hospital, it will be commissioned later this year. And for Old Taipo Police Station and Blue House Cluster in Wan Chai, the works will start in later this year. Stone houses in Kowloon City, well, it is expected to be completed in the second quarter of 2012. We hope that by these projects we can encourage the public to value such buildings, and will continue to do this. And we also have to strike a balance between preserving or between conservation and respecting private property rights. And how I think it is a fine balance for us to strike, and different people have different views, and the balancing point might seem different to different parties. DC has taken stock of previous experience, and we need to review our policy for conservation in terms of mobilization of resources, setting the specific criteria and mechanism, and whether we should, through town planning, enhance protection of privately owned historic buildings. And we should consider whether setting up a fund will enhance the preservation or conservation of such buildings, and will consider the possibility of setting up a heritage trust. I've invited the AAB to make recommendations to us after the review, and to formulate a timetable for their work, and we will consult the views of stakeholders. And then before the end of this year, having considered views from different parties, report should be made to the government. As for publicity and public education, we'll continue to launch various activities to let the members of the public to be involved in conservation, and to understand, to appreciate our historic buildings. For instance, we have for Heritage Fiesta 2012, that was in last year, we attracted 122,000 odd visitors. Thank you.
Questions, not that many people, so 5 minutes each, including response by the administration. That may not be enough, though. Members, first, Ms. Ann Chang. Thank you, Chairman. Now, I see that the administration over the past few years has done quite a good job on conservation, and I support a periodical review, because I'm quite concerned about conservation over the longer term. I have several questions. Now, right now, I know some of the monuments, in respect of those monuments, the government give them a sum of money for renovation. And I'd like to know that the heritage site will be operated, will they try to make a profit, and will the government get it back later? And if they make some profit, will they share it with the government? And if they don't do well, they can't meet their daily operating expenses, then what will the government do? Will the government recover the site or continue to give them support? Now, I thank Ms. Chang. May I ask Ms. Lui, the Deputy Director, to Deputy Secretary, to answer. Now, the question was about the revitalizing historical buildings through partnership program. Now, we have a mechanism under this scheme, that is, those selected, those organizations can receive a maximum of $5 million for a 2-year period to start up their enterprise, and to subsidize any possible deficit in operations. Now, that's an upper limit. It doesn't mean that every organization would apply for the entire $5 million or get that amount. Now, when we vet these applications, we take into account different factors, including the financial feasibility. And concerning financial feasibility, it's very important that they convince the board or committee that there is financial sustainability, that is, eventually in the operations they can be self-financing rather than lose money on a regular or in the longer term. So then we would sign a lease on that project, on the use of that historical building. Now, in general, the lease is for 3 years, and we look at the operational situation every year. We have a detailed report for the vetting committee to help us monitor the picture. And on Ms. Chang's question, there is a term of lease. There is a requirement for renewing the lease. Now, can I understand it this way? You would not take back the initial amount or grant, whether they do well. You will vet the project again in 3 years' time. Yes, that understanding is correct. When we vet the proposal submitted, we ask the organization operates as a social enterprise. Such organizations, are they subject to oversight? Now, the audit department, audit commission, does not check how much money they make and so on. Do you have other ways to monitor these organizations? Because very often they conserve a very choice buildings, and they do not have to pay additional premium, and they don't have to spend a lot on construction. The government pays part of it. Now, on oversight, when we approve the lease, we have terms agreed between the operator and the development bureau, that is the administration, and on the proposal submitted, we would sign with them a mutual agreement which stipulates how we can oversee the operations on a regular basis, and we may have impromptu visits as well as regular visits or inspection to find out the actual operating conditions or environment. Now, so the committee or the secretariat would get the relevant information, including get reports, regular reports from them, and the operations there would be a report for the committee to reach an opinion on. Mr. Kenneth Chen, now the Civic Party and I are concerned about this issue, so we requested that this be discussed, and the timing seems right because recently there are many concerns surfacing in relevant news. Now, since reunification, people are more and more concerned about our local history, and we then look to the future on that basis. Now, on heritage conservation, the government's policy has to keep up with the times. Since 2009, we've been waiting. We've been looking for a review. Now we September 2007 rather. So we hope that there would be a document of so that the public can focus on that for discussion. The government has to be clear about the principles. Now, apart from a long paragraph on conservation, property rights, and public participation, compensation mechanism, financial incentives, how private developers can talk to the government, and the discussion mechanism with the public, all this have to be considered. Now, we hope that the discussion is not just about individual buildings, but about a whole cluster of buildings or for the conservation for the entire district or area. I hope after this meeting we can talk to the Secretary and civic groups on these issues. Now, there are several matters. Now, first, let's review the picture. Now, of 26 buildings, now I think that's wrong. Now, many of these are in the new territories, Mr. Chairman. They are owned by your friends, and they have been altered. Maybe more work can be done. Now, the chairman of the AMO is worried about this, how better conservation of buildings can be carried out. And the owners of grade buildings of grade 2 or grade 2 or grade certain grade 2 or grade 3 can do what they want. That's not very desirable. And you say you monitor the situation, and you say that there are reports, but when things have to be changed, it seems that nothing can be done. You can't call a halt to what they are doing. Now, perhaps in the review process, you should tighten the monitoring or oversight mechanism. Also, the AAB Antiquities Advisory Board's functions. Now, we've seen AAB members telling the media we only know afterwards. For instance, the MTRC is found in Admiralty remains of a dike, and the Chilean monastery incident also. So it seems that the advisory body should play a certain role that should be better defined on it, how it can help the government and the public so that we can have a desirable conservation policy. So I'd like to hear from the administration on these issues. The Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Now, concerning the 26 buildings that have been changed, now on the internal monitoring mechanism, I will ask the Deputy Secretary to inform you on what's the current approach. Now, Dr. Kenneth Chan mentioned several very important points. Now, in the policy address, they said that there should be a review. Now, the scope there was more narrow. It's about historic buildings that are privately owned, on the conservation thereof, and if public money is going to be used, what should be the principles. Now, in our future study, we invited the AAB, and last week we went to their meetings. We invited them to participate and join us in the review. In other words, in this regard, we adopt an open attitude on the scope of the review, apart from what's mentioned in the policy address and what Dr. Kenneth Chan mentioned. Now, we've done so much over the years. Of course, we have achieved quite a lot on heritage conservation. As for how we can do better in the next few years, so that we try to improve, all this is part of the review. The AAB, the its status and its functions, all these can be reviewed. When we extended the invitation to AAB, we intentionally did not try to limit the scope of review. Since we are going to work with them, we'll let the AAB members have enough room to do what they consider appropriate in regard to heritage conservation. Of course, there are certain priorities, and we are open to that. On that, we let the AAB members discuss among themselves so that they arrive at a view and a set of directions, and we stress that we communicate with the stakeholders in the community so that the public and the stakeholders can participate. Perhaps the Deputy Secretary can tell us about the 26 buildings that have been tampered with. Now, we have an internal monitoring mechanism. The Buildings Department, Lands Department, and the Planning Department, if they receive some applications, and if they know that there are circumstances that might threaten the antiquity or monument, then they inform the AMO and the relevant organizations, such as the LCSD and so on. So we try to see what protection can be offered to these buildings. Now, the owners, regarding the demolition of the building or remodeling, they don't have to apply in advance. This covers to minor works. These do not have to get do not require the pre-approval by the buildings authority. And in new territories, the village houses are also not subject to some buildings ordinance regulations. Now, so there are certain cases where the owners do not have to apply to the authorities. So within the existing monitoring mechanism, there are areas that are not covered. This is due to the limitations under the Buildings Ordinance. Now, in some cases, of course, the owners did not follow the law and applied to the building authority in advance or other authorities in advance. Now, the members mentioned 26 buildings. Unfortunately, now it's it's a solace that 17 of them that the AMO considered them that they do not have to be graded. That is, they are not historic. 7 buildings rather, they are not historic buildings. As for the others, 11 of them are grade 3 buildings that were demolished, and others were altered to a significant extent. 7 grade 3 and 1 as grade 2, and again, fortunately, none of them was grade 1. Now, and as members said, for the AMO, they are aware of the nature of the monitoring mechanism, and they so understand the situation, and we try to work together to see how we can deal with this. Now, working together, all this, it's just a slogan. Now, in the review process, I hope the Secretary would agree the monitor mechanism is not really that effective. Now, there should be internal reporting among government departments, but I think the monitoring should be more forceful, and that should be part of the review. We thank the member for his proposal. Now, in our review, as the Secretary said, the scope is not limited to private buildings, as mentioned in the policy address. So these are private buildings. Now, in the policy review, we try to cover that and also supplement that of the 26 buildings. Apart from the 7 that are not graded, the other 19 we have submitted the names to the relevant departments. If in some cases the owners should have applied but didn't and demolished or remodeled the building, then the authorities concerned will consider enforcement. Perhaps please supply the document to explain the progress for these 26. Chair Ken. Now, I heard the Deputy Secretary talk about the review of the monitoring mechanism. Please do that as quickly as possible. Now, the valuable buildings are the ones that seem to be demolished earlier. This is not what we want to see. Now, specifically, I want to ask that the government says that there will be a heritage fund is considered to be established. Now, what threshold will you set for conservation? And the government advisors told us that for this trust fund, how much seed money do you plan to inject, and how long will it last? For the operations, perhaps more on this. Thank you, Chairman. Now, on the advisors or the consultant report, we expect that by the end of March, the final report would be formally submitted to the government for study. Now, right now, the study is largely completed, and we have been communicating to the consultants, and we've seen the interim report, and we are aware of some of the contents. We expect that the March report will make certain proposals and include certain contents, and the consultants think that the Heritage Conservation Trust Fund will offer flexibility and closer ties with the private sector, and so for conservation such as fundraising and getting volunteers, the fund may be more flexible and do a better job. But a trust fund will not probably resolve all the issues about the heritage buildings. For instance, the government may have to subsidize the operation of the trust fund, and since land is precious in Hong Kong, so the conservation of privately owned historic buildings will remain a challenge. So having seen the analysis by the consultants, we will look further at the final report to decide the future directions. Now, in the policy address, there was mentioned that the Heritage Trust Fund and the privately owned historic buildings, the relations with is also part of the review. Now, no amount or time frame is involved. When the policy, when the report is addressed, will it be discussed in this panel? Certainly. After we receive the consultant's report and after we share with the stakeholders, with the public in discussion, certainly we will take the findings to the panel to discuss what needs to be discussed.
Any other questions from members? If not, then any other business? No? Okay. Then I announce that the meeting is adjourned. So I'm sorry. Yes, there is the question. Yes, should we talk about the Anderson Quarry item. The Anderson item. Yes, because we don't have enough time, it's been moved to another meeting. Oh, I was going to talk about that. No, perhaps. Yes, there's not enough time now, though. So it's moved to the next meeting. So perhaps you can talk for a longer time then. Any other thing else? Any other business? If not, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.